Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we step carefully onto the damp cobblestones of New York City in the year 1890, where the harbour smells of salt, coal smoke, horse sweat, and yesterday's oysters baking gently in the sun. Fog drifts low beside the piers while ferry whistles moan across dark water like sleepy giants complaining about another workday. Somewhere overhead, laundry flaps between buildings that lean towards each other like gossiping relatives. You arrive carrying little more than a suitcase, tired shoes, and the faint confidence of someone who has absolutely underestimated what 19th century urban life feels like. Because despite the romance of old New York, you probably would not survive one full summer without complaining about the smell at least every 7 minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in tonight, feel free to share your location and local time down below. Now, dim the lights. You stand at the edge of the harbour just before dawn while New York wakes itself slowly around you. The sky above Manhattan glows pale grey, streaked with thin orange light creeping upward behind church spires and unfinished towers. The city feels enormous already, not just large in size, but large in appetite. It eats noise, money, labour, dreams, and occasionally dignity. The first thing you notice is movement. Everywhere, movement. Men unload crates from steamships beside the docks while shouting in accents from half the known world. German, Irish, Italian, Yiddish. English tangled with languages you cannot even identify. Heavy boots scrape damp wood. Ropes creak. Horses snort clouds into the cold morning air. A commonly accepted historical reality is that New York in 1890 had become one of the busiest port cities on Earth, processing astonishing amounts of cargo and immigrants every single day. The harbour operates almost like a living machine. Ferries shuttle endlessly between Manhattan and Brooklyn. Tugboats cough smoke into the sky. Newsboys already run through the streets before sunrise waving papers like tiny aggressive sales executives. You pull your coat tighter while the wind off the water cuts through every layer of clothing you own. Nearby, a coffee vendor pours steaming liquid from a metal urn into thick cups for dock workers beginning long shifts. The coffee smells burnt enough to remove wallpaper, yet somehow comforting at the same time. You buy one. The vendor barely looks at you before taking your coin. Efficiency matters here more than friendliness. The coffee scorches your tongue immediately. That feels historically authentic. As daylight grows stronger, you begin walking northward into the city itself. The streets narrow quickly. Buildings rise higher around you with every block. Cast iron storefronts stand beside older brick structures darkened by soot and weather. Windows glow dimly from gas lamps still burning inside boarding houses. Above your head, elevated trains rattle across iron tracks with enough noise to awaken entire graveyards. Sparks jump beneath the wheels. The structure shakes visibly as the train passes overhead. You instinctively duck a little, which marks you immediately as someone unfamiliar with the city. Nobody else even glances upward. New Yorkers in 1890 have developed the survival skill of ignoring terrifying infrastructure. The sidewalks grow busier by the minute. Women carrying baskets hurry toward markets. Street sweepers push filth into uneven piles. Delivery wagons roll past with milk cans clanging against one another. Somewhere nearby, a butcher sharpens knives while whistling softly. The smell changes constantly as you move. Fresh bread for one corner, coal smoke the next. Then horses. So many horses. Modern people sometimes imagine old cities as cleaner than modern ones because there are no automobiles yet. Unfortunately, horses produce astonishing quantities of manure every day, and New York contains tens of thousands of them. The streets are coated in layers of mud, waste, straw, and whatever mysterious liquid civilization has collectively agreed not to investigate too carefully. You step around one puddle and immediately land in another. Excellent start, sir. A lesser-known historical oddity from this era involves wealthy families hiring boys specifically to guard carriage parking spaces outside fashionable buildings. These unofficial human parking cones would defend valuable curb access with surprising intensity. Urban capitalism truly finds a way. You continue uptown while the city brightens fully into morning. Pushcart vendors begin arranging fruit beneath striped awnings. Policemen wearing tall helmets stroll their assigned beats with practiced seriousness. Children dart through traffic carrying bundles of newspapers almost larger than themselves. One small boy crashes directly into your side before apologizing without slowing down. Then he vanishes into the crowd. That happens often here. People appear suddenly and disappear just as fast. Swallowed by the movement of the streets, New York does not pause for individual moments, it simply absorbs them. Historians still debate whether the city's overwhelming pace during the late 19th century felt thrilling or psychologically exhausting for most residents. Reading personal diaries from the period reveals both reactions constantly existing side by side. Some newcomers describe excitement beyond imagination. Others sound one inconvenient rent payment away from emotional collapse. Honestly, both interpretations feel reasonable. You pass beneath laundry lines stretched between tenement buildings, where shirts and blankets sway high overhead like surrender flags. Women lean from windows calling to neighbours several floors below. Somewhere upstairs, a baby cries. Somewhere else, someone practices violin badly enough to challenge international diplomacy. A man beside you sells hot chestnuts from a metal cart. The warm, nutty smell floats beautifully through the cold air. Nearby, another vendor loudly advertises miracle tonic capable of curing headaches, fatigue, stomach problems, weak nerves, and possibly disappointment itself. Pedant medicine sales flourish during this era. Some mixtures contain alcohol, others include opium, a few probably contain regret. You decide against buying any, probably wise. As morning settles fully across Manhattan, sunlight finally reaches the upper floors of the crowded streets. Windows flash gold for brief moments before smoke softens the light again. The city feels rough around every edge, yet undeniably alive. You realize something important while standing at a busy intersection watching horse cars rumble past. Nobody here expects comfort. That may be the defining truth of daily life in New York in 1890. Rich or poor, immigrant or native-born, nearly everyone accepts inconvenience as ordinary. Streets are loud, winters are cold, summers smell terrible, disease spreads easily, privacy barely exists. And still the city grows, because opportunity lives here too. Maybe not equally, certainly not fairly, but enough possibility exists to pull millions of people toward Manhattan like iron filings toward a magnet. You continue walking north through the growing noise of the morning streets, while the city stretches endlessly ahead of you, restless and impatient beneath the rising sun. The farther you move from the harbour, the more the streets begin testing your patience, your balance, and possibly your immune system. Walking through New York in 1890 is not a graceful activity. It is closer to a strategic military exercise involving mud avoidance, horse prediction, and quick decisions regarding unidentified puddles. Your boots strike uneven cobblestones slick with rainwater and wagon grease while traffic surges around you in every direction. Not automobile traffic, of course. That particular headache still waits patiently in the future. Instead, the streets belong to horses. Thousands upon thousands of them, draft horses hauling beer wagons, elegant carriage horses pulling wealthy passengers beneath polished canopies, streetcar horses dragging crowded public transit cars along metal rails, thin exhausted horses delivering coal, ice, furniture, bread, and occasionally unfortunate piano shipments up impossible inclines. The sound never stops. Hooves strike stone in uneven rhythms. Wagon wheels rattle violently over broken pavement. Drivers shout warnings and insults with equal enthusiasm. Bells ring constantly from horse cars trying to clear pedestrians out of the tracks. You quickly learn an important survival lesson. Nobody yields politely. Crossing the street requires courage mixed with optimism. A well-established fact from this period is that Manhattan's streets handled extraordinary levels of congestion long before automobiles appeared. Some intersections already experienced traffic jams severe enough to frustrate police officers and delay deliveries for hours. Urban crowding did not begin with cars. Humans achieved chaos quite effectively on their own. You pause beside a corner where a policeman directs traffic using broad arm gestures that resemble someone conducting an orchestra entirely dedicated to irritation. A brewery wagon creaks past carrying giant barrels stacked almost alarmingly high. Behind it comes a butcher cart with bloody aprons hanging from hooks near the driver's seat. The smell shifts again. Bread, cigar smoke, and wet wool. Then suddenly fish. The fish smell arrives before you even see the market stall. Oysters sit packed in chipped barrels beside eels twisting weakly across crushed ice. A woman argues loudly about prices while gulls scream overhead, hoping civilization briefly collapses into free seafood. You continue north beside rows of storefronts opening for business. Tailors sweep dust from sidewalks. Bakers stack loaves behind glass windows fogged with warmth. Apothecary shops display bottles filled with mysterious liquids, glowing amber and green in the morning light. One sign advertises electric treatments for nervous exhaustion. That sounds both futuristic and deeply threatening. Electricity itself still feels slightly magical to many people in 1890. Gas lamps remain common, but electric lights are beginning to appear in wealthier areas and commercial districts. You occasionally notice people stopping to stare at illuminated windows with the cautious fascination of villagers examining dragon eggs. Some scholars continue debating how quickly ordinary New Yorkers trusted electric technology during this period. Newspaper accounts reveal excitement mixed with fear, considering that exposed wires occasionally sparked above crowded streets. The caution seems understandable. Above you, elevated trains thunder along iron tracks attached to dark steel frameworks. The structures cast huge striped shadows across the avenue below. Every passing train rains tiny flecks of soot downward onto hats, coats, and sandwiches unfortunate enough to exist underneath. You brush black dust from your sleeve for the third time in 10 minutes. The city is determined to accessorize you. Streetcars crawl through traffic carrying packed passengers pressed shoulder to shoulder behind dirty windows. Some riders look half asleep already. Others stare blankly ahead with the exhausted expression recognizable in commuters across every century. A sleepy face on public transportation may be the most timeless thing in human history. You pass a row of newsboys clustered around a newspaper office entrance waiting for fresh editions. They shout headlines at one another while jostling for position. Most are children or teenagers wearing caps pulled low against the cold. Their jackets hang loosely from narrow shoulders. One boy proudly announces a boxing result to absolutely anyone willing to listen. Another claims he personally witnessed a famous actress entering a hotel nearby. Almost certainly false, but confidence matters more than accuracy in street sales. A quirky detail from late 19th century New York involves the popularity of trained animal acts performing right on sidewalks. Organ grinders sometimes travelled with monkeys dressed in tiny jackets and hats, collecting coins from amused pedestrians. You suddenly hear music ahead and discover exactly that scene unfolding near a crowded corner. The monkey looks profoundly tired of humanity. Honestly, fair. You toss a coin into the collection cup anyway. The organ wheezes out cheerful music while children laugh nearby. For a brief moment, the street feels lighter, almost festive. Then a wagon splashes muddy water across your trouser leg and balance returns to the universe. As morning continues, the sidewalks grow even more crowded. Clerks hurry toward office buildings carrying ledgers beneath their arms. Factory workers stream downtown in groups. Women carrying market baskets weave skillfully through gaps in traffic without slowing pace. You attempt the same maneuver once, immediate regret. The city rewards confidence and punishes hesitation. If you stop unexpectedly, someone collides with you almost instantly. Movement here behaves like river current. You either flow with it or become an obstacle. A horse suddenly stumbles nearby while pulling a loaded dray wagon uphill. The animal strains desperately against the harness as the driver snaps reins and shouts encouragement, mixed with profanity creative enough to qualify as literature. Several men rush forward to help push the wheels free from deep mud. This was ordinary urban life. People in 1890 constantly witnessed animal exhaustion in ways modern city dwellers rarely imagine. Horses collapsed in the streets often enough that newspapers occasionally mentioned it casually beside weather reports and political gossip. You notice something else too. The streets are loud but not emotionally cold. Neighbours call greetings from windows, shopkeepers chat with regular customers. Children play games directly beside traffic dangerous enough to shorten several future psychology textbooks. Despite the chaos, the city contains pockets of familiarity stitched together block by block. Historians still argue whether immigrant neighbourhoods provided genuine social stability or simply concentrated poverty more visibly. Probably both things existed simultaneously. Human communities are rarely simple. You stop beside a pushcart selling roasted sweet potatoes wrapped in paper twists. Steam rises warmly into the chilly air. The vendor hands one over with blackened fingers rough from work. The potato tastes earthy and sweet. Simple food, hot food. In this weather, nearly perfect food. Nearby, two women debate whether the elevated railway ruins property values while a delivery boy sleeps briefly atop stacked crates. A stray dog trots confidently through wagon traffic like a seasoned professional. Even the animals seem busy. You continue onward through the endless movement of Manhattan streets, while church bells begin ringing somewhere farther uptown. Their slow echoes drift above the traffic noise for a few peaceful seconds before disappearing back into the city's restless heartbeat. By late morning, you finally leave the busiest commercial avenues behind and drift into the residential streets where ordinary people actually live. Or perhaps live is too generous a word for conditions that often resemble organized endurance competitions. The tenement buildings rise tightly around you. Brick walls stacked shoulder to shoulder along narrow streets where sunlight struggles to reach the pavement below. Fire escapes cling to the fronts like metal spiderwebs. Laundry hangs overhead in endless rows of shirts, stockings, diapers, aprons, and patched trousers fluttering between windows. Everything feels crowded, not lively crowded like a cheerful market. Compressed crowded. You step into a narrow hallway after following a tenant carrying a basket of coal upstairs. The entrance smells immediately of boiled cabbage, damp wood, soap, tobacco smoke, and something sour lingering beneath all of it. The floorboards creak loudly under your boots. A standard historical truth about New York in 1890 is that enormous numbers of immigrants and working-class families lived in tenement housing, especially on the Lower East Side. Many apartments lacked proper ventilation, indoor plumbing, or sufficient natural light. Entire families often shared only a few small rooms. You climb upward through dim stairwells lit weakly by dirty windows. Somewhere above, a baby cries with astonishing determination. Somewhere below, a man coughs heavily between muttered complaints in German. A woman carrying water buckets squeezes past you on the stairs without slowing down. You flatten yourself against the wall and still nearly lose an elbow. Efficiency again. Everything in New York seems powered by efficiency and caffeine. The apartment you enter contains 3 small rooms housing 6 people. At least today it does. Sometimes cousins arrive. Sometimes boarders rent floor space temporarily. Human arrangements shift constantly depending on money, work, illness, or luck. Luck mostly seems absent. The kitchen area occupies one corner beside a black iron stove already radiating oppressive heat, despite the cool weather outside. Pots hang from hooks overhead. Bread rests beneath cloth beside chipped plates stacked carefully along shelves. The windows barely open, air moves sluggishly through the rooms, carrying smells from neighbouring apartments directly through thin walls and shared hallways. Cooking odours drift everywhere. Onion, garlic, soup stock, fried fish, coffee strong enough to awaken historical ghosts. One small child sits near the stove peeling potatoes while another chases a rag ball across the floorboards. Their mother mends clothing beside the window using quick practiced movements. Needlework never fully ends here. Fabric tears constantly under hard labour and repeated wear. You notice how every object serves multiple purposes. A table becomes workspace and dining area. A trunk stores clothing and doubles as seating. Beds disappear beneath blankets during daytime, so rooms can function for something besides sleeping. Nothing is decorative unless it can also survive hardship. Still, small touches of beauty appear unexpectedly. A framed religious image beside the doorway, dried flowers near the window, embroidered cloth draped carefully over a shelf. Tiny acts of dignity against exhaustion. Researchers still debate how emotionally devastating tenement life truly felt to residents themselves. Reformers from wealthier backgrounds often describe these homes with horror, but immigrant memoirs sometimes reveal pride, resilience, and strong community ties despite difficult conditions. Human beings adapt remarkably fast when adaptation becomes necessary. You sit near the window listening to the building itself. Footsteps overhead, water splashing into basins, voices arguing in the hallway, a baby laughing suddenly somewhere nearby. The building almost breathes around you. Privacy barely exists. Thin walls allow entire families to overhear neighbours discussing rent problems, illnesses, romances, arguments, and recipes. If someone snores loudly, several apartments probably know about it by sunrise. A strange historical tidbit from this era involves tenants sometimes keeping small animals inside apartments for practical reasons. Chickens occasionally appeared in kitchens. Goats might occupy cramped courtyards. Cats roamed everywhere, hunting rats large enough to deserve voting rights. Speaking of rats, you spot one briefly near the hallway stairs. It disappears before you can fully react, which feels somehow more insulting. Children here become experts at navigating tiny spaces. One little girl squeezes effortlessly between furniture while carrying folded laundry balanced atop her head with surprising elegance. She cannot be older than 8. Her younger brother watches through the window at street musicians below. The music rises faintly upward through open cracks in the building. Accordion notes mixed with wagon noise and distant train rumbling. Even indoors, the city never fully quiets. You learn quickly that daily routines revolve around shared resources. Water must be carried. Coal must be purchased carefully. Laundry requires astonishing physical effort. During hot summers, apartments become suffocating ovens, trapping heat beneath low ceilings. And the smells. Dear God, the smells. Modern air conditioning remains decades away, so windows stay open whenever possible. Unfortunately, open windows invite in horse odours, street dust, industrial smoke, and every other fragrance civilization accidentally invents. One accepted historical fact is that reform photographers and journalists later exposed tenement conditions to middle and upper-class audiences using shocking descriptions and images. Jacob Riis became especially famous for documenting overcrowded housing in works like How the Other Half Lives. Though honestly, even without photography, your nose could probably file its own report. As afternoon light filters weakly through grime-streaked windows, neighbours begin visiting each other casually. A woman borrows onions from next door. Someone else requests sewing thread. Children wander in and out freely between apartments. Community becomes survival here. If illness strikes one household, neighbours often help with childcare or meals. If work disappears temporarily, relatives crowd together tighter rather than letting someone sleep outside. Not because everyone behaves saintly, far from it. Arguments erupt constantly over noise, money, smells, religion, and stolen laundry, human beings remain human beings even in hardship. But mutual dependence shapes daily life whether people enjoy it or not. You stand finally beside the rear courtyard looking downward between surrounding buildings. The narrow space below contains wash lines, broken crates, scattered ash, and puddles reflecting thin strips of sky overhead. Children play there anyway. Of course they do. Children possess a supernatural ability to transform terrible environments into playgrounds. A woman nearby leans from her window, shaking crumbs from a tablecloth into the yard below. Pigeons descend immediately like feathery opportunists. The city continues roaring beyond the block, but here inside the tenement world the noise softens slightly into domestic rhythms. Cooking, cleaning, mending, caring for children, preparing for tomorrow's work. Ordinary life continuing inside extraordinary density. As evening edges closer, lamps begin appearing behind windows throughout the building one by one, glowing softly through dusty glass while supper smells drift thicker through the halls. You realize that for millions of New Yorkers, this cramped world is home in every meaningful sense of the word, not temporary hardship. Home. By the time noon approaches, your stomach has begun reminding you that curiosity alone is not technically nutrition. The streets of New York answer that problem immediately. Food exists everywhere here. Not elegant food most of the time, and certainly not hygienic by modern standards, but abundant, hot, noisy food sold from carts, basement kitchens, storefront counters, cellar taverns, and crowded dining rooms thick with steam. You follow the smell first. Fresh bread drifts from a bakery tucked beneath a tenement building where cloudy windows glow warmly against the grey street outside. Inside, the air feels almost miraculous after the cold wind and horse traffic outdoors. Flour dust hangs softly in the light while racks of dark rye loaves cool beside the ovens. A baker with arms like carved oak slides trays across wooden counters without pausing conversation with customers. People in 1890 spend a larger share of their income on food than most modern households do, especially working families. Yet meals often remain simple because wages disappear quickly into rent, coal, laundry, and endless small expenses city life invents for you. You buy a thick slice of bread and a cup of coffee again because apparently your historical personality consists mainly of surviving on caffeine and determination. The bread tastes dense and slightly sour. Perfect for cold weather. Outside, the sidewalks pulse with lunchtime movement. Factory whistles echo through the streets while workers pour from workshops and warehouses looking for quick, cheap meals before returning to labour. Pushcart vendors suddenly become surrounded by impatient crowds. One cart sells sausages sizzling over charcoal. Another offers pickles floating in giant cloudy barrels. A third advertises oysters for only a few cents each. Yes, oysters. Modern people associate oysters with luxury restaurants and expensive date nights where someone pretends to understand mineral flavour notes. But in 19th century New York, oysters are common working class food. Massive oyster beds once filled the harbour and nearby waters, making them cheap enough for ordinary labourers to eat regularly. You watch a man swallow 3 oysters in quick succession while barely slowing his conversation about baseball. A detail often overlooked in discussions of old New York is how intensely seasonal food remained. Without refrigeration systems everywhere, people depended heavily on what could survive transport and storage. Root vegetables, salted meats, bread, pickled foods, and soups dominate many ordinary diets during colder months. And honestly, after walking these streets all morning, soup sounds emotionally restorative. You enter a narrow lunchroom crowded with clerks and labourers packed elbow to elbow along long wooden tables. The walls sweat slightly from heat rising off the kitchen stoves. Bowls clatter constantly. Someone nearby laughs loud enough to startle the spoons. You order beef stew because it seems difficult to ruin stew badly enough to cause immediate historical tragedy. Hopefully, the bowl arrives steaming beside thick bread already shiny with butter. The stew smells of onion, pepper, and slow-cooked meat. You burn your mouth instantly because patience remains centuries away from your personality development. Around you, conversations overlap endlessly. Politics, union rumours, sports, rent complaints, arguments about trolley fares. One exhausted man falls halfway asleep over his coffee before jerking awake again. Nobody reacts. Working long hours while underfed tends to produce that effect. Some contemporary observers from the era remarked with surprise at how quickly New Yorkers ate meals. The pace of city life encouraged efficiency even at lunch. People shovel down food with alarming speed before rushing back into work or errands. Relaxed brunch culture does not currently exist here. Neither does avocado toast. Civilization perseveres somehow. At the next table, two women discuss a neighbor accused of watering down milk deliveries. Food adulteration becomes a genuine public issue during this era. Unscrupulous businesses sometimes stretch products with dangerous additives or poor quality ingredients. Milk especially causes anxiety because spoiled supplies spread illness rapidly among children. Medical historians continue examining just how severe these urban food safety problems became before stronger regulations appeared in the 20th century. Newspaper scandals certainly suggest the situation grows ugly at times. You decide not to think too carefully about your stew ingredients. Best for everyone. Back outside, the city smells even richer now as lunch traffic reaches full force. Roasted chestnuts, garlic frying in oil, fish markets, tobacco smoke curling from saloon doors, sweet cakes cooling on windowsills. Immigrant neighborhoods transform entire streets through cooking alone. German bakeries sit near Jewish pickle sellers. Italian fruit vendors shout prices beside Irish taverns pouring dark beer into thick mugs. The city feeds itself through diversity long before anyone invents corporate branding campaigns about it. One especially curious fad from the late 19th century involves beef tea, a thin, savoury liquid promoted as strengthening nourishment for invalids and exhausted workers. Despite sounding suspiciously like someone boiled disappointment into hot water, many people genuinely believe in its restorative powers. You remain unconvinced. A little farther uptown, children crowd around an ice cellar, chipping fragments from enormous blocks wrapped in sawdust. Before electric refrigerators become common, ice deliveries are essential to city life. Wagons haul frozen blocks harvested during winter from rivers and lakes north of the city. The iceman works quickly with heavy metal tongs while housewives negotiate prices nearby. Meltwater streams across the pavement. Even cold itself becomes a commodity here. You stop beside another vendor selling baked apples dusted with cinnamon. The smell instantly softens the harshness of the street around you. For a few moments, standing beneath drifting steam and hearing wagon wheels roll past, the city feels almost cozy. Then a nearby horse sneezes directly onto someone's coat. New York always restores balance. A point many social historians emphasize is that cheap street food helped sustain working populations who lacked time, space, or fuel for elaborate home cooking. Pushcart culture became woven deeply into immigrant daily life, especially in crowded districts, and these vendors never stop moving. Calls echo through the avenues continuously. Hot corn, fresh rolls, coffee, pickles. The voices blend into a kind of urban music. Sharp, repetitive, strangely comforting once your ears adjust. You realize that silence itself would probably feel unsettling here. As afternoon light begins slanting between buildings, you finish the last bite of your apple while watching steam rise from sewer grates and bakery vents alike. Around you, millions of meals continue unfolding. Quick lunches, family suppers preparing upstairs, bread baking in basement ovens, soup simmering beside crowded tenement windows. The city survives partly because people keep feeding one another through every hardship. Strike, storm, and overcrowded season. Even in a place this relentless, somebody is always stirring a pot somewhere. The lunch crowds thin gradually as afternoon settles over Manhattan, and almost immediately the city shifts back into work mode. You can feel it happen. The streets sharpen somehow. Footsteps quicken, Wagon drivers grow less patient than before, which is honestly impressive considering their previous levels of impatience already bordered on artistic expression. Storefront clerks return behind counters. Factory whistles stop. Office doors close again. New York resumes earning money. You follow the movement downtown where rows of commercial buildings rise above narrow streets darkened by soot and shadow. Men in stiff collars hurry past carrying ledgers, rolled papers, and leather cases packed with documents important enough to inspire ulcers. Clerical work expands rapidly during this era as businesses grow larger and more bureaucratic. Thousands of office workers now spend their days copying records, calculating figures, writing correspondence, and organizing shipments. Entire towers hum quietly with paperwork. Industrialization creates many glamorous things. This is not one of them. You step inside a crowded office building where the air smells faintly of ink. Coal smoke, dust, and damp wool coats drying beside radiators. Wooden desks stretch across a large room beneath tall windows streaked with grime. Clerks sit shoulder to shoulder scratching pens across paper, while supervisors patrol slowly between rows. The sound fascinates you. Not loud exactly, just constant. Pens scratching, pages turning, coughing, typewriters clacking from nearby rooms. One increasingly important development in the 1890s is the spread of the typewriter into offices across New York. Machines begin transforming business communication, while also opening new employment opportunities for women as typists and stenographers. Though the machines themselves sound like nervous mechanical insects having arguments with metal furniture, a young clerk dips his pen repeatedly into an inkwell while muttering numbers under his breath. Another copy's shipping manifests with the exhausted expression of someone who dreams in accounting columns now. You quietly decide that your own modern inbox suddenly feels less tragic. Back outside, labour continues everywhere you look. Construction crews hammer at rising buildings. Dock workers unload freight from wagons beside warehouses. Delivery boys sprint through intersections carrying packages wrapped in brown paper and twine. A lesser-known curiosity from old New York involves messenger boys racing each other unofficially through crowded streets while making deliveries. Some businesses even hired particularly fast runners specifically for urgent communications before telephones became widespread. Human email with shin splints. You wander toward the garment district where work spills visibly onto sidewalks and stairwells. Bundles of fabric move through narrow streets atop push carts and shoulders alike. Sewing shops occupy upper floors above storefronts. Their windows cracked open despite cold weather because the rooms become unbearably hot inside. Women lean near the windows briefly for fresh air before returning to machines. The rhythm of labour changes block by block. Near the docks, work feels heavy and physical. Ropes, cargo, barrels, muscle. In office districts, labour becomes quieter and more repetitive. In workshops, work vibrates endlessly through needles, cutting tables and steam presses. A growing number of historians point out that New York's economy in 1890 depends entirely on invisible networks of exhausting labour most wealthy residents rarely witness directly. Behind every elegant department store display stands an army of seamstresses, packers, porters, and delivery workers operating on painfully long schedules. You pass a row of laundresses hauling baskets almost too large to carry comfortably. Their hands appear roughened from soap, hot water, and endless scrubbing. Laundry remains brutally physical work before electric machines simplify the process. Steam rises from basement washrooms, where clothing boils in giant vats. The city smells briefly of wet cotton and soap flakes. Nearby, a group of Irish labourers repairs paving stones while trading insults affectionate enough to qualify as friendship. One man wipes sweat from his forehead, with a hand already blackened by dirt and coal dust. The workday stretches long here. 10 hours, 12 sometimes, even longer during busy seasons. Factory laws exist in limited forms, but enforcement remains inconsistent. Working-class families often depend on every available wage earner simply to survive rent and food costs. You enter a cigar workshop after receiving a suspicious glance from the owner, who clearly assumes you are either lost or about to inspect labour conditions officially. Reasonable concern, honestly. Inside, men sit closely together at wooden benches rolling cigars by hand with astonishing speed. Tobacco fills the air thickly enough to sting your eyes. The workers chat quietly while fingers continue moving almost automatically. An interesting feature of some workshops during this period is the presence of hired readers. In certain factories, especially cigar shops, one worker might read newspapers or novels aloud to the others while they laboured. Stories, politics, and gossip floated through the workday beside tobacco smoke. Human podcasts arrive earlier than expected. You linger listening to a dramatic newspaper account involving corruption, scandal, and somebody's nephew receiving suspiciously convenient employment opportunities. So basically, politics continues unchanged through time. Academic discussions still continue over whether industrial work in cities like New York improved long-term economic mobility for immigrants or trapped generations in unstable, low-wage conditions. Evidence exists for both outcomes depending heavily on timing, neighbourhood, ethnicity, and pure luck. Luck again! That invisible currency running through every corner of the city. Outside, daylight begins fading earlier between tall buildings. Gas lamps flicker awake one by one along busy streets while workers continue pouring from factories in tired waves. Faces change now. Morning crowds look determined. Afternoon crowds look drained. A seamstress rubs her wrist while waiting beside a streetcar stop. A newsboy counts coins twice beneath a lamppost. Two factory girls share roasted nuts from folded paper while laughing at something you cannot hear. Even exhaustion contains little pockets of joy here. You notice how workers constantly improvise moments of comfort. A warm drink, a joke, music drifting from a saloon doorway. 5 quiet minutes sitting on crates before climbing another tenement staircase home. Nobody expects ease, but everybody searches for relief. As evening edges closer, smoke thickens above rooftops while the elevated trains continue rattling overhead, carrying clerks and labourers back uptown. Windows glow amber against the darkening streets. The city still feels hungry, but now it hungers for rest. The sewing rooms sit above the street like overeated hidden worlds. From outside, you might barely notice them at all. Just another row of brick buildings with dusty windows and narrow staircases climbing upward from crowded sidewalks. But once you step inside, the atmosphere changes immediately. Heat presses against you first, then noise. Dozens of sewing machines chatter together in uneven rhythms while steam pipes hiss behind cracked plaster walls. Scissors scrape across cutting tables, needles flash beneath gaslight. The air smells of cloth fibres, machine oil, sweat and coal smoke drifting through open windows from the streets below. You have entered the sweatshop world of New York in 1890. Garment manufacturing dominates huge sections of the city economy during this period. Thousands of immigrants, especially women and recent arrivals from Eastern and Southern Europe, work in cramped workshops producing shirts, dresses, coats, collars, and undergarments for rapidly growing markets. Fashion, it turns out, is always depended heavily on exhausted people. You move carefully between crowded work tables where women sit shoulder to shoulder feeding fabric beneath machine needles with astonishing speed. Most barely glance up as you pass. Their attention stays fixed on hems, seams, buttons, and cuffs. Every mistake costs money. Piecework systems pay workers according to how many items they complete, not necessarily by hourly wages. Faster hands mean more coins at the end of the week. Slower hands often mean anxiety sitting awake beside you at night. A foreman walks between rows carrying bundles of unfinished garments tied with string. He drops stacks onto tables with quick instructions delivered in multiple languages depending on the workers nearby. English here, Yiddish there. Italian farther back near the windows. The city itself almost speaks in fragments. One especially revealing reality about these workshops is how often entire families participated in garment labour. Children trimmed loose threads, Mothers sewed collars late into the evening. Fathers carried finished bundles between factories and apartments. Work spilled directly into domestic life until separation between home and labour nearly disappeared. You watch one young woman pause briefly to stretch aching fingers before returning immediately to her machine. Her foot pumps the treadle below the table in constant motion. The machine rattles so fast the sound becomes almost hypnotic after several minutes. Clatter, whir, clatter, whir. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs repeatedly into the handkerchief. Dust hangs visible in the gaslight. Industrial health standards remain limited at best during this era. Long hours, poor ventilation, and repetitive physical strain affect enormous numbers of workers. Eye problems become common in dim workshops where detailed stitching continues late into evening hours. You notice workers leaning closer and closer toward fabric as daylight fades outside. The room itself feels tired. A little-known custom in some garment shops involved workers decorating their sewing machines with tiny personal objects. Religious cards, family photographs, artificial flowers, coloured ribbons, small reminders that individuality still exists beneath industrial routine. You spot a tiny framed image of a child tucked beside one machine near the wall. Another station holds a dried flower pressed carefully beneath cracked glass. Tiny islands of personality. A young delivery boy arrives carrying more fabric bundles almost larger than himself. He squeezes through narrow aisles while workers continue sewing without pause. Nobody has time for interruptions. The city's garment industry grows rapidly because department stores and ready-made clothing become increasingly popular during the late 19th century. More people now purchase factory-produced garments instead of relying entirely on custom tailoring or home sewing. Convenience expands, so does exploitation. Researchers examining labour history still disagree about how much mobility sweatshop work truly offered immigrant families. For some, these jobs provide entry into urban economic life and eventual stability. For others, the cycle of low wages and overcrowded housing becomes nearly impossible to escape. You sit briefly beside a window where cooler air drifts inward from the street below. Outside, wagon wheels grind across pavement while evening traffic thickens beneath the elevated tracks. Inside, the machines continue relentlessly. One woman hums softly while sewing. Another mouths silent arithmetic while counting completed pieces. Across the room, two girls exchange gossip in whispers quick enough to outrun the foreman's attention. Even here, life persists beyond labour. A surprising anecdote from some immigrant neighbourhoods describes workers organising informal rooftop dances after exhausting factory shifts during warm weather. Music, laughter, and cheap beer offered temporary escape from endless sewing rooms and crowded apartments. Humans remain stubbornly determined to enjoy themselves whenever possible. The workshop owner eventually appears from a back office wearing a waistcoat already dusty with lint. He checks finished garments carefully beneath the lamps, inspecting seams with sharp, impatient movements. Speed matters. Quality matters too. But profit matters most. You notice several workers bringing food directly to their stations because stopping for proper meals wastes valuable time. Bread crusts, apples, pickles wrapped in paper, coffee cooling beside machine parts, dinner and labour blending together. As darkness settles outside, gas jets brighten overhead with soft flickering halos. The room grows hotter despite evening temperatures dropping outdoors. Windows fog lightly from trapped heat and human breath. A historical observation frequently mentioned by reformers of the era concerns the psychological exhaustion created by repetitive industrial labour. Many workers described feeling physically drained yet mentally restless after long shifts spent performing identical motions thousands of times. Needle, seam, thread, repeat. You begin noticing the worker's posture after hours at the machines. Bent shoulders, stiff wrists, neck muscles tight from leaning forward continuously. Fatigue settles visibly across the room as evening deepens, and still the sewing continues. Orders must be finished. Rent must be paid. Coal must be bought before winter. One older tailor near the back works more slowly than the younger women, but with extraordinary precision. His scissors move through cloth almost gracefully. Tiny fabric scraps gather around his boots like dark snow. Without looking up, he quietly warns you not to lean against the steam pipe beside the wall. You immediately realize you are about to do exactly that. The pipe hisses ominously. Industrial survival lesson acquired. By the time workers finally begin preparing to leave, the room feels transformed from noisy urgency into weary silence. Machines stop one by one. Coats emerge from hooks. Fingers flex painfully after hours gripping fabric. Outside the windows, Manhattan glows beneath gas lamps and drifting smoke while thousands of other workshops continue operating across the city. Needles still moving, steam still rising, people still working long after sunset. The fashionable dresses displayed downtown begin here in rooms like this, stitched together beneath harsh light by tired hands carrying the weight of tomorrow's rent. When the factory doors finally release their workers into the evening air, the streets seem to swell outward with hunger all over again. Not refined hunger, urban hunger. Fast hunger, the kind that sends entire crowds drifting instinctively toward food carts. Bakeries, market stalls, and cellar kitchens glowing beneath gaslight. You follow the movement downtown into one of the great market districts where push carts pack the streets so tightly that wagons barely squeeze through. Canvas awnings flap overhead while vendors shout prices in half a dozen languages at once. The whole neighborhood vibrates with trade. Fish scales glitter on wooden counters. Cabbages stack in crooked pyramids. Live chickens complain loudly from wicker cages. The smell is extraordinary. Garlic, coal smoke, apples, wet rope, fresh bread, pickled herring, and somewhere underneath everything, that permanent New York perfume of horse traffic and damp pavement. A visitor from the countryside might find the scene overwhelming, but for immigrant families, these markets often provide something comforting and familiar. Many vendors sell foods connected to home villages thousands of miles away. Familiar spices, familiar breads, familiar sausages hanging beside storefront windows. The city may transform your life completely, but dinner still tastes like memory. You step carefully between puddles while women bargain fiercely over onions and potatoes. Negotiation here resembles competitive sport more than conversation. Voices rise dramatically. Hands wave through the air. A vendor swears his tomatoes are fresher than human morality itself. Nobody believes him. Still, people buy the tomatoes. Street markets become central to working-class survival partly because they offer cheaper prices than formal shops. Pushcart vendors operate with fewer expenses and often stay open later into the evening when labourers finally finish work. One recurring complaint from wealthier reformers involves how crowded and noisy these market streets become. They describe disorder, shouting, block traffic, and unsanitary conditions with great alarm. The residents themselves often describe something closer to community. Both views contain truth. You pause beside a Jewish pickle seller whose barrels line the sidewalk like small wooden fortresses. He spears one long pickle from cloudy brine and hands it over wrapped in paper. The first bite snaps loudly. Cold, sharp with vinegar, almost aggressively alive. Nearby, an Italian fruit vendor arranges oranges beneath hanging lanterns while singing softly to himself. Two Irish boys chase each other between carts carrying stale bread crusts like treasure. A German butcher wipes his hands on a stained apron before hanging more sausages from iron hooks. The city feeds itself through endless small transactions. Pennies changing hands, soup ladled into bowls, bread weighed carefully on metal scales. A fascinating little detail from old New York markets is that some vendors specialized in incredibly specific products. One might sell only chestnuts, another only eels, another perhaps just cooks sweet potatoes during winter months. Entire livelihoods balanced on one narrow corner of appetite. You notice customers buying food in tiny amounts because wages stretch painfully thin. 1 onion, 2 carrots, a few slices of meat, nothing wasted, nothing purchased casually. Children often run errands carrying coins wrapped tightly in cloth or paper scraps so they do not lose them in crowded streets. One little girl near you clutches exactly enough money for a loaf of bread and keeps checking her pocket every few seconds with visible anxiety. Money disappears quickly here, sometimes literally. Pickpockets thrive in busy market districts where crowds press together shoulder to shoulder. You instinctively check your own pockets after a man bumps your arm while rushing past. Still intact, Victoria, New York congratulates you on surviving another 10 minutes. You wander deeper into the market where gas lamps throw golden light across piles of fish packed in chipped ice. Oyster shells crunch beneath boots near seafood stalls. Cats lurk patiently beneath tables hoping gravity or human incompetence eventually provides dinner. Honestly, the cats seem confident. One social pattern scholars continue examining involves the role of women in neighborhood market culture. In many immigrant communities, women manage food budgets, bargaining strategies, and household provisioning with enormous skill. Feeding a family on unstable wages required constant calculation and negotiation. You overhear one woman arguing over cabbage prices with such forceful authority that even nearby customers pause to admire the performance. The vendor surrenders first. Correct decision. At the edge of the market, street musicians play beside a beer hall entrance while exhausted workers drift inside seeking warmth and conversation. Accordion music floats through the cold evening air mixed with laughter and clinking glasses. A nearby candy cellar displays striped peppermint sticks and glass jars glowing beautifully beneath lamplight. Children stare through the window with expressions usually reserved for religious visions. Sugar remains special enough to inspire awe. An observation repeated in many immigrant memoirs is how important evening market life felt after long work days. People did not simply shop here. They exchanged gossip, heard news from home countries, searched for jobs, arranged marriages, borrowed money, and maintained cultural traditions block by block. The market becomes social theatre as much as economic necessity. You stop beside a hot corn vendor warming his hands above glowing coals beneath the cart. Steam rises into the darkening street while elevated trains thunder faintly overhead. He salts the corn heavily before handing it over. Perfect. You eat while leaning against a lamppost watching the crowds flow around you in endless currents. Women carrying baskets, boys delivering parcels, elderly men arguing politics outside cigar shops, factory girls laughing together beneath shawls pulled tight against the cold. The city feels enormous again, but not anonymous. That surprises you. Despite all the noise and density, people seem to know each other constantly. Neighbours wave from windows. Vendors greet regular customers by name. Shopkeepers ask about illnesses, weddings, jobs, and absent relatives. Community forms naturally when survival depends partly on mutual recognition. As night settles more fully over Manhattan, the market glows brighter beneath rows of gas lamps and hanging lanterns. Steam curls upward from food carts into the cold air, while voices echo between brick buildings. Even after exhausting workdays, the streets remain alive. Still bargaining, sir. Still eating. Still talking. New York in 1890 rarely stops moving entirely. It simply changes rhythm as darkness arrives, like an orchestra shifting into another movement beneath the same restless sky. As evening deepens downtown among pushcarts and crowded tenements, another New York begins glowing farther uptown. You reach it gradually. The streets widen first. Then the smells change. Less cabbage and coal smoke drifting from basement kitchens, more cigar smoke, polished leather, perfume, and expensive horses brushed until their coats shine beneath the lamps. The sidewalks look cleaner here. Carriages roll more smoothly. Even the gaslight seems steadier somehow. Money softens many rough edges. You walk north along broad avenues lined with enormous houses rising several stories high, behind stone staircases and ornate iron railings. Curtains glow warmly behind tall windows. Servants move quietly through doorways carrying trays, coal scuttles, bundles of laundry, and armfuls of firewood. This is Gilded Age New York, the city of bankers, railroad families, industrial fortunes, and women whose dresses contain enough fabric to shelter small villages. A defining feature of the late 19th century is the staggering gap between rich and poor in American cities, especially New York. While immigrant families crowd into tiny tenement apartments downtown, wealthy households occupy mansions with multiple parlours, libraries, music rooms, and private servants' quarters, sometimes within only a few miles of each other. You pause outside one particularly massive residence where carriage lanterns flicker against pale stone walls. A servant opens the front door while another helps guests step carefully from a carriage onto the sidewalk. The women emerge first. Silk rustles softly. Jewellery flashes beneath gaslight. Feathers sway from elaborate hats large enough to influence local weather patterns. Inside, music drifts faintly through the doorway before the servant closes it again against the cold. The contrast feels almost surreal after the sweatshops and crowded markets downtown. Yet wealthy life in 1890 is not entirely effortless comfort either. Social expectations operate like invisible machinery here. Families navigate endless rules regarding etiquette, appearance, marriage prospects, dinner invitations, opera attendance, and proper introductions. High society requires labour too. Just very different labour. You continue walking while glimpsing interiors through passing windows. Chandeliers glow overhead. Paintings line walls. Tables overflow with flowers imported from distant greenhouses. One dining room contains more candles than some tenement buildings possess in total. And yet, you notice servants everywhere, opening doors, lighting lamps, carrying coal, pouring wine. Invisible work sustaining visible elegance. A curious trend among wealthy New Yorkers during this period involves fascination with medieval European decor. Some mansions contain armour displays, imitation castles, tapestries, and dark carved furniture designed to suggest ancient aristocratic roots. Nothing says new railroad money quite like building a fake medieval banquet hall in Manhattan. Electricity begins appearing more frequently in elite neighbourhoods too. Certain mansions proudly advertise electric lighting as proof of modern sophistication. Guests attend dinner parties partly just to witness glowing bulbs without open flames. Imagine inviting friends over because your ceiling has advanced technology. Actually, that still happens. Scholars examining upper-class culture from this era often disagree about whether wealthy New Yorkers truly felt secure in their status or constantly anxious about maintaining appearances. Reading society columns from the period reveals astonishing attention paid to fashion, manners, and public reputation. One wrong invitation list apparently threatens civilization itself. You pass a grand hotel entrance where liveried doormen stand rigid beneath bright lamps while wealthy travellers arrive carrying mountains of luggage. Bellboys hurry through revolving doors. Somewhere inside, a piano plays softly. Luxury hotels become symbols of modern urban prestige during the late 19th century. Rich visitors expect heated rooms, elegant dining, telegraph access, and attentive service available at nearly any hour. Meanwhile, downtown, somebody is probably still carrying water upstairs in buckets. The city contains multiple centuries simultaneously. A maid exits through a side door carrying kitchen scraps toward rear alley bins. Her shoes look worn despite the wealth surrounding her workplace. Many domestic servants in these mansions are immigrants themselves, often Irish or German women performing long, exhausting days of cleaning, cooking, laundry, and childcare. Domestic service remains one of the largest employment categories for women in 19th century America, and the hours are relentless. You glimpse one servant briefly asleep in a chair near a basement corridor before another worker nudges her awake gently. Fatigue exists in every social class. Only the furniture changes. Farther uptown, carriage traffic thickens near theatres and private clubs where gentlemen gather beneath clouds of cigar smoke to discuss politics, finance, horse racing, and whatever else wealthy men prefer discussing while sitting in upholstered rooms. A surprisingly popular pastime among elite New Yorkers involves elaborate dinner parties lasting several hours with enormous multi-course meals, oyster soup, fish, roasts, game birds, dessert shaped like architecture. Victorian stomachs worked incredibly hard. You stop near Central Park where the night air grows quieter at last. Carriages roll slowly past the dark trees while couples stroll beneath gas lamps wrapped in heavy coats. The park itself serves partly as an escape from the noise and crowding consuming the rest of Manhattan. Designers imagine it as a place where urban residents can breathe cleaner air and experience controlled versions of nature without accidentally encountering actual wilderness. A practical compromise for city people. One continuing historical discussion focuses on whether elite philanthropy during the Gilded Age came primarily from genuine social concern or from fear of unrest among the urban poor. Wealthy families funded libraries, hospitals, museums, and charities. Yet labor conflicts and class tensions continued simmering beneath the surface. Probably both motives existed together more often than anyone admitted publicly. As you stand watching carriage lamps drift through the darkness beside the park, you realize something quietly important. The rich cannot fully escape the city either. They breathe its smoke, hear its trains, depend on its workers, even inside enormous mansions. New York still presses itself against the windows through noise, ambition, and endless movement. The wealthy merely purchase thicker curtains. Behind you downtown, markets still glow and factories still rattle. Ahead of you uptown, chandeliers shimmer behind polished glass. And between those worlds, the city stretches onward beneath the cold night sky, glittering uneasily with money, labor, exhaustion, and dreams. The deeper you move through New York at night, the more clearly you begin noticing how much of the city's daily life rests on women's labor. Some of it visible, much of it almost completely ignored. You see women everywhere once you start paying attention properly. Not just society ladies stepping from carriages uptown, though newspapers certainly devote enough ink to their sleeves, hats, and dinner invitations to qualify as a public obsession. No, the real city runs on quieter effort. Women hauling laundry baskets through cold streets. Women bent over sewing machines beneath gaslight. Women selling apples from pushcarts while rocking babies with one foot. Women balancing household budgets so carefully they could probably negotiate peace treaties by breakfast. You walk downtown again, where apartment windows glow softly above crowded streets. Through one open curtain, you glimpse a mother washing clothes in a metal tub while children sleep nearby beneath patched blankets. The washing never fully ends. Clothing blackens quickly in a city coated with soot, horse mud, and industrial smoke. Before electric washing machines exist, laundry means boiling water, scrubbing fabric by hand, wringing heavy wet cloth, carrying buckets, and hanging garments to dry wherever space permits. It is exhausting work disguised by the harmless-sounding word laundry. During this period, enormous numbers of women also participate directly in wage labour outside the home. Factories, domestic service, teaching, clerical work, shopkeeping, and garment production employ growing female populations throughout Manhattan and Brooklyn. Yet society still insists repeatedly that a woman's proper sphere remains domestic life. Reality and ideology continue arguing with each other constantly. You pass a boarding house where several young shopgirls sit near the entrance sharing tea from chipped cups before bed. Their boots look worn from standing all day behind store counters. One massages her ankle absent-mindedly while another repairs a glove by lamplight. Department stores become increasingly important workplaces for unmarried women during the late 19th century. Salesgirls help create the modern shopping experience while earning wages that are often modest at best. And the rules governing their behaviour are strict. Smile politely, stand straight, appear respectable, never appear too friendly. Also somehow survive on your paycheck. Good luck. A small but memorable detail from this era involves the popularity of mail-order beauty products promising miraculous transformations. Creams, powders, hair tonics, and complexion treatments flood advertisements aimed at women anxious about appearance and social mobility. Victorian marketing executives clearly understand insecurity long before social media arrives. You continue walking through streets where women move constantly between roles. A widow runs a tiny grocery beside her apartment. Two Irish domestics hurry home together, laughing loudly enough to startle a sleeping dog. An elderly Jewish grandmother shells peas beside a tenement window while supervising grandchildren playing below. The city depends on this invisible coordination. Meals cooked, children managed, clothing repaired, rent negotiated, illness handled. You realise something important. Even families with working husbands often rely on women earning money too. Wages from sewing, laundry, taking in boarders, or selling homemade food can determine whether households survive difficult months. Some historians argue that immigrant women experience surprising forms of economic influence inside working-class households because their labour proved essential to family survival. Others point out how limited legal rights and social expectations still restricted independence severely. Both realities overlap uneasily. You stop outside a settlement house where reform-minded women organise literacy classes, childcare assistance, and social programs for poor immigrant families. Inside, warm lamplight spills across shelves of books and crowded tables. The settlement movement grows during these years as middle-class reformers attempt to address urban poverty through education and community support. Some efforts genuinely help struggling neighbourhoods. Others carry a heavy dose of condescending we-know-best energy. Humanitarianism and superiority occasionally arrive holding hands. A teacher inside helps immigrant women practice English pronunciation while toddlers crawl beneath chairs nearby. The room smells of chalk dust, soup, and wet winter coats drying beside the stove. You linger listening to soft voices repeating unfamiliar words carefully. Outside again. Fashion advertisements glow behind shop windows. Corsets displayed on elegant mannequins promise beauty through disciplined suffering. Women's clothing in the 1890s often involves layers of fabric, petticoats, tight lacing, heavy skirts, and hats secured with pins sharp enough to qualify as defensive weaponry. Comfort remains negotiable. One continuing scholarly debate centres on whether fashion restrictions primarily oppressed women physically or also offered forms of self-expression and social power. Clothing clearly limits movement in many cases, yet women also use style strategically to communicate class, respectability, ambition, and identity. Fashion becomes language, just an expensive and occasionally painful language. You pass a music hall entrance where chorus girls emerge laughing into the cold night wrapped in long coats over stage costumes glittering beneath the street lamps. Theatre work offers another complicated path for women seeking wages and independence in the city. Opportunity and vulnerability tend to travel together here. Farther down the block, a midwife climbs tenement stairs carrying a worn leather bag. Before modern hospitals dominate childbirth, many women rely heavily on neighbourhood midwives and informal female support networks during pregnancy and illness. Knowledge passes through communities quietly. Recipe books, home remedies, childcare advice, birth traditions carried across oceans from old countries into cramped Manhattan apartments. You hear piano music drifting faintly from an upper floor where several young women practice songs after work. Their voices float through the night air above wagon noise and distant train rumbling. Even after exhausting days, people still seek beauty. That may be one of the city's most stubborn habits. A newspaper boy rushes past waving evening editions filled with headlines about politics, labour unrest, and society weddings. Somewhere nearby, women are writing articles, organising unions, teaching school children, managing boarding houses, or quietly stretching household money through another impossible week, and many of them receive little recognition for it. As the hour grows later, windows begin darkening one by one across the neighbourhood. Mothers call children indoors. Sewing finally stops in some apartments. Lamps dim behind curtains. But inside thousands of rooms across New York, women are still awake, mending tomorrow's clothes, planning tomorrow's meals, preparing tomorrow's survival. The city sleeps eventually because they keep it functioning long enough to rest. Morning arrives again through thin curtains. chimney smoke, and the distant rumble of elevated trains shaking Manhattan awake before sunrise. And the children are already outside. Some race through alleys, chasing sticks across puddles. Others carry baskets, packages, newspapers, or lunch tins almost immediately after waking. Childhood in New York in 1890 rarely unfolds in calm, grassy spaces with leisurely afternoons and organised enrichment activities. It unfolds in motion. You step onto a crowded street where boys dart between wagons with impossible confidence, while girls skip rope beside fire hydrants and cellar doors. Their voices echo upward between brick buildings still damp from overnight fog. The city itself becomes playground, classroom, workplace, and hazard all at once. One thing repeatedly noted in accounts from the era is how visible children were in public space. Modern cities often separate childhood into protected zones. 19th century New York does almost the opposite. Children move constantly through adult environments filled with traffic, labour, commerce, and risk. You watch one barefoot boy expertly leap across muddy ruts while balancing a tray of rolls on his shoulder. Another shines shoes outside a hotel entrance using fast, rhythmic brushstrokes. His customer barely glances downward during the transaction. Nearby, two sisters carry home water buckets together while arguing fiercely about whose turn it is to scrub potatoes tonight. The city expects usefulness early. Schools exist, of course, and attendance increases steadily during these decades. Public education expands as reformers push for literacy and structured schooling among immigrant populations. Large brick schoolhouses now rise in many neighbourhoods, their windows filling with rows of children reciting lessons in heavily accented English. You step inside one classroom just as the morning lesson begins. The room smells faintly of chalk dust, wet wool coats, ink, and floor polish. Long wooden desks stretch toward a blackboard where a teacher in a dark dress writes arithmetic problems carefully, while students copy them onto slates. Some children look attentive. Others look spiritually disconnected from mathematics entirely. A small girl near the front hides a piece of candy inside her desk with the seriousness of a jewel thief. Teachers maintain strict discipline here. Straight backs, quiet hands, clear penmanship. Recitation allowed. Punishments for disruption remain common, including public embarrassment and ruler taps sharp enough to inspire lifelong respect for indoor voices. And yet many immigrant parents view education as deeply valuable despite crowded schools and harsh methods. Reading and writing offer possible escape routes from poverty, factory labour, and dangerous street work. A charmingly odd custom from some schools involves students bringing small gifts of coal or apples for teachers during winter months. Public school salaries remain low, and classrooms often struggle with heating costs. Imagine handing your teacher fuel as homework. Outside again. The streets teem with children who are not in classrooms at all. Economic reality keeps many boys and girls working instead. Newsboys sell papers from dawn until late evening. Messenger boys sprint through traffic delivering telegrams. Young girls sew buttons or trim garments inside cramped workshops. Child labour threads quietly through urban life everywhere you look. Factory reformers spend years fighting over minimum working ages and safety regulations, but enforcement remains inconsistent. Families surviving on narrow margins often cannot afford to lose even a child's small wages. You follow a group of boys toward the waterfront where they fish with homemade lines beside the piers. Their jackets hang loosely from thin shoulders. One proudly displays a tiny catch hardly larger than his hand, while the others cheer like victorious sailors returning from war. Children create entertainment from almost nothing here. Sticks become swords. Crates become forts. Vacant lots become baseball fields whenever traffic temporarily allows civilization to pause. A few surviving memoirs from former immigrant children describe city streets with surprising affection despite hardship. Adventure exists alongside danger. Freedom mixes strangely with responsibility. You hear laughter erupt from an alley where several girls play hopscotch drawn in chalk directly onto uneven pavement. Laundry flaps overhead while a nearby woman leans from her window shouting reminders about supper and missing scarves. The neighborhood itself supervises children collectively. Everybody watches. Everybody interferes. Everybody complains about noise while secretly appreciating signs of life. One debate among modern historians centers on whether urban childhood in the late 19th century fostered unusual resilience or simply normalized stress and instability too early. The answer likely depends entirely on whose childhood you examine. For some, the city teaches confidence and survival skills. For others, it demands adulthood long before readiness arrives. You stop beside a candy cart glowing beautifully beneath striped awnings. Glass jars display peppermint sticks, licorice twists, and tiny sugar drops sparkling in morning light. Children gather around with coins clutched tightly in dirty fists. A single penny purchases enormous happiness at this age. A street organ begins playing nearby, and instantly children appear from every direction. Some dance, some clap. One tiny boy attempts a cartwheel and nearly collides with a cabbage cart. The cabbage vendor looks deeply offended. Reasonably so. As afternoon arrives, school lets out in noisy waves. Doors burst open. Children flood sidewalks carrying books tied with straps or wrapped in cloth. Their energy feels astonishing after hours trapped indoors. Street games resume immediately. Marbles, tag, ball games improvised between wagons. Arguments about rules loud enough to alarm passing horses. You notice older sisters often shepherding younger siblings home through crowded intersections. Responsibility falls unevenly but constantly. Families depend heavily on older children helping manage younger ones while parents work long hours. Near a bakery window, several boys press their noses against the glass watching fresh loaves emerge from ovens. Warm bread smells drift onto the sidewalk while snow begins falling lightly from a pale afternoon sky. For a moment, the city softens. Children catch flakes on their sleeves and tongues, while elevated trains rumble overhead, and newsboys continue shouting headlines through the cold air. Life here grows hard quickly, but childhood still finds ways to exist between the cracks. By now, you no longer experience New York as one single city. You experience it as many small worlds pressed tightly together. Turn one corner and German beer halls glow warmly behind fogged windows. Turn another and Italian grandmothers lean from fire escapes calling children upstairs for supper. Walk several blocks farther and Hebrew lettering appears above bakeries while Yiddish conversation spills through crowded sidewalks. The city rearranges itself neighborhood by neighborhood, and each district carries pieces of another continent. You begin downtown near Mulberry Bend, where Italian families cluster inside overcrowded tenements filled with garlic smells, laundry lines, religious candles, and non-stop conversation echoing through narrow streets. Men gather outside cafes arguing politics from villages thousands of miles away. Women shop carefully at fruit stalls while balancing babies against their hips. Children race through alleys with impossible speed despite the mud. Many immigrants arrive carrying almost nothing except relatives' addresses folded into coat pockets. Entire neighborhoods form through chains of family connections, shared languages, and familiar customs transplanted into Manhattan brick and soot. You hear accordion music drifting from an upstairs apartment while a nearby vendor roasts chestnuts over glowing coals. The air smells rich with tomato sauce, tobacco smoke, damp stone, and fresh bread. For a brief moment, it almost feels village-like, until a trolley bell nearly runs you over. Then Manhattan reintroduces itself properly. Farther east, Jewish neighborhoods hum with another rhythm entirely. Pushcarts crowd the sidewalks selling pickles, herring, books, hats, fabric, candles, and baked goods dusted with poppy seeds. Tailors hurry between workshops carrying bundled garments tied with string. You pass a bakery window glowing golden with braided loaves and pastries while elderly men in heavy coats debate loudly outside a newspaper stand. One fascinating detail from immigrant life during this era involves how quickly newspapers appeared in different languages across the city. German papers, Yiddish papers, Italian papers, Irish nationalist papers. Entire communities stayed connected through printed news from both New York and the Old Country. Information travelled constantly. So did gossip. A woman passing beside you switches effortlessly between English and Yiddish while bargaining over fish prices. Children nearby speak English with neighbourhood accents already sharper than their parents. Language itself shifts within one generation. Researchers studying immigration patterns often point out that neighbourhoods offered newcomers both protection and limitation. Shared culture eased adjustment to urban life. But dense ethnic enclaves could also isolate communities from broader economic opportunities. Again, New York refuses simple answers. You continue north toward blocks heavily populated by Irish families. Catholic churches rise prominently here, their bells echoing through streets lined with saloons, groceries, and crowded boarding houses. The Irish presence in New York remains enormous by 1890 following decades of migration, tied partly to the Great Famine. Irish labourers, policemen, domestic servants, dock workers, and political organisers shape huge sections of city life. You step inside a crowded tavern where the room smells of beer foam, wet wool, pipe smoke, and stew simmering somewhere in the back kitchen. Men laugh loudly around scarred wooden tables while a fiddler plays near the wall. One exhausted labourer has fallen asleep upright beside his drink without anyone finding this unusual. Honestly, that level of commitment deserves respect. Outside again. Rain begins lightly tapping against pavement while horses pull streetcars through shining wet streets. Gas lamps blur softly in the mist. You cross toward neighbourhoods where Black New Yorkers build communities despite widespread discrimination limiting housing and employment opportunities. Churches, social clubs, newspapers, and businesses provide support networks within a city that often treats Black residents unfairly in both obvious and subtle ways. The Black population in 19th century New York remains smaller than some immigrant groups, yet deeply rooted communities already exist with rich cultural and political traditions. Music drifts from one gathering hall where voices rise together in songs strong enough to spill directly into the rainy evening outside. Not all neighbourhoods welcome outsiders equally. You feel that sometimes certain streets glance at you curiously, others ignore you completely. Some districts guard themselves carefully because poverty, prejudice, and overcrowding force communities inward for protection. A strange little habit recorded in some immigrant neighbourhoods involves hanging specific objects outside windows to communicate information to neighbours. A cloth colour might signal illness. A candle placement might indicate a gathering upstairs. Tiny unofficial systems emerge where crowded living creates constant communication needs. Human beings always invent neighbourhood codes eventually. You stop beneath an awning while rain thickens. Nearby, a Chinese laundry glows softly through steamed windows. Chinese immigrants in New York face severe discrimination and restrictive laws during this period, especially after the Chinese Exclusion Act, and yet communities endure anyway. Inside the laundry, shirts hang drying overhead while workers iron collars beneath bright lamps late into the evening. The room smells of starch, steam, and hot metal. Outside, pedestrians hurry past barely noticing. That invisibility becomes its own burden. A continuing discussion among historians concerns how much interaction actually occurred between immigrant groups living side by side in Manhattan. Some accounts emphasize cultural blending and cooperation. Others describe tension, competition, and deep suspicion between communities competing for jobs and housing. Most likely, daily life contained all of it simultaneously. Friendship beside prejudice, cooperation beside rivalry. You walk onward through rain's slick streets where music changes block by block. German singing from one beer hall, Italian opera from an apartment window, Hebrew prayers rising softly from a synagogue doorway. The city sounds multilingual even at night. One child passes carrying bread wrapped beneath his coat to protect it from rain. A woman shakes water from laundry lines while muttering angrily at the weather in a language you cannot identify. Somewhere above, someone practices trumpet badly enough to concern nearby cats. Despite hardship, These neighborhoods create identity. Recipes survive, holiday traditions survive. Religious customs survive. Stories survive. New York changes people quickly, but people also change New York. As the rain finally begins easing, reflections shimmer across the pavement beneath gas lamps and shop windows. The city feels stitched together from countless small homelands gathered uneasily onto one island. Different foods, different prayers, different memories, all breathing together beneath the same smoky sky. The city smells different when sickness is nearby. You begin noticing it slowly. Sharp chemical odours drifting from apothecary shops, vinegar sprinkled across floors, damp wool blankets airing beside windows, coal smoke mixing with disinfectants strong enough to sting your nose before you even enter the building. New York in 1890 lives under the constant shadow of disease. Not dramatic plague carts rolling through streets exactly. Most illness arrives quietly, a cough lingering too long, fever spreading through crowded apartments, bad milk, dirty water, a child growing weak during summer heat. You walk through a tenement hallway where somebody upstairs is clearly ill. Voices stay lower than usual. Footsteps soften. A woman carries steaming broth carefully up the stairs while another shakes bedding from a rear window. Crowded housing creates perfect conditions for sickness to travel rapidly between families. Many apartments lack proper ventilation. Indoor plumbing remains inconsistent. Shared privies serve entire buildings. And clean water, while improved compared to earlier decades, still causes anxiety. City officials spend enormous effort during the 19th century trying to modernize sanitation systems as Manhattan's population explodes. Sewers expand. Croton water supplies improve access to fresh water. Health boards begin tracking outbreaks more aggressively. But infrastructure struggles constantly to keep pace with overcrowding. You pass a public pump where women fill buckets, while children splash carelessly nearby despite repeated warnings not to drink recklessly from questionable sources. A doctor emerges from a building carrying a black leather bag and looking profoundly tired. His beard smells faintly of tobacco and medicinal alcohol as he passes beside you. Medical treatment in 1890 sits in an awkward middle ground between old traditions and emerging scientific understanding. Germ theory gains acceptance among many physicians, yet treatments remain inconsistent and sometimes alarming by modern standards. You step briefly inside a pharmacy glowing warmly beneath coloured glass bottles displayed in the windows. Shelves overflow with powders, syrups, herbs, tonics, and patent medicines promising relief from every imaginable misery. Headaches, weak lungs, nervous exhaustion, poor digestion, melancholy, existential disappointment probably available in larger bottles. One especially strange remedy popular during the late 19th century involves electric health belts advertised as cures for fatigue and weakness. Apparently attaching mysterious currents to your torso sounded entirely reasonable to exhausted Victorians. To be fair, most modern wellness trends are not dramatically less strange. The pharmacist measures powders carefully onto folded papers, while customers wait nearby discussing coughs, fevers, and children with upset stomachs. Illness dominates ordinary conversation more than you expected. People monitor symptoms constantly because minor sickness can become deadly with terrifying speed. Families know neighbours lost to tuberculosis, diphtheria, cholera, influenza, or infections now treatable with modern medicine. Tuberculosis especially haunts the city. The disease spreads gradually through coughs and close living quarters, earning grim nicknames like consumption. You notice how many people cough into handkerchiefs throughout the day, some softly, some deeply enough to silence entire rooms briefly. Writers from the period often described health almost as a form of luck rather than certainty. Fresh air, nutrition, clean housing, and rest matter enormously. Yet poor families rarely possess enough of any. You visit a hospital ward where rows of iron beds stretch beneath tall windows cracked open despite cold weather. Nurses move quickly between patients carrying water basins and folded linens. The room smells of soap, sweat, boiled fabric, and fear. Hospitals in the 19th century improve gradually. but many people still avoid them unless absolutely necessary. Home care remains common because hospitals can feel overcrowded, expensive, and dangerous in their own right. A little remembered detail from this period involves widespread fear of night air causing illness. Families sometimes shut windows tightly, even in overheated rooms, because many believed cold air itself produced disease. Unfortunately, poor ventilation often worsened conditions instead. Medical science evolves unevenly. One child in the ward clutches a rag doll while staring silently at the ceiling. Another patient sleeps beneath heavy blankets, while snow taps softly against the window outside. The nurses never stop moving. Back on the streets, sanitation workers push carts through slush collecting ash, garbage, and horse waste. Urban cleanliness becomes nearly impossible when thousands of animals, factories, and households all produce mountains of waste daily. And the smell in summer. You truly do not want summer details. Trust me. Newspapers from the era regularly describe heat waves turning city streets unbearable as garbage rots faster and flies multiply everywhere. Public concern over hygiene grows steadily during these decades, partly because urban smells become impossible to ignore. Some scholars remain divided on how much ordinary residents trusted public health officials at first. Immigrant communities sometimes viewed inspections suspiciously, especially when authorities targeted crowded neighborhoods aggressively during outbreaks. Fear and reform often arrive together. You stop near a public bathhouse where steam fogs the windows against the cold evening air. Many working-class apartments lack proper bathing facilities, so public baths become important resources for hygiene. Inside, men scrub away factory dust and street grime beneath rows of faucets, while attendants shout instructions through clouds of steam. The entire room sounds like exhaustion being washed temporarily off human beings. One woman outside hangs blankets in freezing air because cold weather is believed to help kill germs lingering in fabric. Nearby, another burns sulfur in a pan to fumigate a room after illness. People improvise constantly against invisible threats. You hear church bells toll slowly somewhere across the neighborhood, while a funeral carriage rolls carefully through wet streets behind black horses draped in dark cloth. Death remains more visible in daily life here. Children see it. Neighbours discuss it openly. Families wear mourning clothes for months or years after losses. And still the city continues moving. Bread still bakes. Streetcars still rattle. Markets still open every morning. Perhaps that is the strangest part of New York in 1890. Illness surrounds the city constantly, yet ordinary life pushes forward with stubborn determination anyway. People fall sick, recover, mourn, and keep working because survival leaves little alternative. As snow begins drifting down through gaslight once again, windows glow softly across crowded blocks where families drink tea, wrap scarves around coughing children, and hope quietly for another healthy winter. By late evening, the city grows more suspicious. Not quieter exactly, just sharper, around the edges. Footsteps echo differently after dark in New York in 1890. Alleyways deepen into shadow. Saloon doors swing open and closed beneath gaslight, while policemen pace slow routes through neighborhoods already thick with smoke. Argument and cold mist drifting from the harbor. You notice the police officers immediately because of the helmets. Tall, rounded, slightly theatrical, like someone designed law enforcement after studying angry chess pieces. A patrolman walks past, swinging his nightstick gently against one boot while scanning the street with practiced boredom. The New York Police Department has grown enormously by this era, though public trust in officers varies wildly depending on neighborhood, ethnicity, and recent bribery scandals. And there are many bribery scandals. Politics and policing intertwine constantly in Gilded Age New York. Tammany Hall, the city's powerful democratic political machine, influences jobs, elections, favors, and local authority across huge sections of municipal life. Aldermen, ward bosses, saloon owners, and police captains often know each other extremely well, sometimes suspiciously well. You pass a cigar shop where men cluster around newspapers discussing corruption allegations, with the cheerful enthusiasm people reserve for gossip that confirms their worst expectations. One man loudly insists the entire city government could be bought with enough whiskey and railroad stock. Another replies that the price has probably risen since last year. Fair point. A small but memorable custom among some neighbourhood political organisations involves handing out coal, turkeys, or small cash favours to struggling families during elections or holidays. Charity and political loyalty blend together so thoroughly that separating them becomes nearly impossible. Votes have texture here. They smell like cigars and wet overcoats. You continue down narrow street where gas lamps flicker unevenly above puddles reflecting pale yellow light. Two policemen stand outside a saloon entrance watching crowds drift in and out. The saloon itself hums with noise. Beer glasses clink. Cards slap against tabletops. Someone near the piano sings loudly and badly enough to concern nearby civilization. Inside many immigrant neighborhoods, saloons function as far more than drinking establishments. They serve as informal hiring halls, political meeting spaces, union organizing centers, mail collection points, and social clubs. Men find jobs there. Families receive messages there. Arguments begin there too, naturally. Crime exists everywhere in the city, though newspapers often exaggerate danger dramatically because fear sells papers beautifully. Pickpocketing, prostitution, gambling dens, gang activity, and petty theft remain common concerns in crowded districts. But most nights involve less dramatic villainy. A stolen wallet, a drunken fight, somebody cheating at cards. Urban crime tends to disappoint fiction writers by being annoyingly ordinary. You notice how carefully women move through certain streets after dark. Groups walk together when possible. Lamps become comforting landmarks. Well-lit avenues feel safer than isolated side alleys where wagon wheels sound distant and footsteps seem too loud. Safety in 1890 depends partly on geography and partly on luck. Mostly luck. One old newspaper complaint from the era describes policemen spending suspicious amounts of time warming themselves inside taverns during winter patrols. Honestly, after standing outside in freezing Manhattan wind for hours, you might also suddenly develop intense professional interest in indoor heating. You cross toward the Bowery where entertainment, vice, labour, and politics swirl together in restless confusion. Cheap lodging houses line the streets beside dance halls and bars glowing beneath painted signs. The smell here changes again. Beer foam, cheap perfume, coal smoke, wet wool, and somewhere nearby, fried onions cooking late into the night. A tired woman sells matches near the curb while newsboys shout final additions into the darkness. Elevated trains roar overhead like mechanical thunderstorms. City reformers spend years arguing over how much crime actually increases during this period versus how much visibility increases through sensational journalism. Some researchers later suggested newspapers created exaggerated images of immigrant criminality that shaped public fear more than actual statistics did. Fear travels fast in crowded cities. Especially profitable fear. You stop near a police call box mounted beside the sidewalk. Officers use these systems to report to stations periodically throughout their shifts. The technology feels oddly modern against gaslit streets and horse traffic. The future keeps arriving in small pieces. A drunk man stumbles from a saloon doorway singing patriotic songs with tremendous emotional commitment and very limited musical accuracy. His friends attempt guiding him toward a boarding house while apologizing to strangers along the route. This appears to be a familiar routine. Not far away, a gambling room operates quietly above a cigar store. Men disappear upstairs in pairs while pretending nobody notices. Everybody notices. A curious little phenomenon from the era involves policy shops, informal gambling operations where working-class residents place tiny bets on number combinations. Dreams, birthdays, and street addresses all became potential lucky numbers. Human beings truly will gamble on anything eventually. As midnight approaches, patrolmen tap doors lightly during rounds while shopkeepers pull shutters closed against the cold. Horses stamp impatiently beside late-night delivery wagons. You begin sensing the city tiring at last. Not sleeping, New York rarely sleeps fully, but tiring. Windows darken floor by floor across apartment blocks. Bartenders wipe counters slowly. Street sweepers emerge behind the crowds, cleaning mud and manure into heavy piles that steam faintly in the winter air. One officer pauses beneath a lamp to write notes into a small book while snowflakes drift past his helmet brim. For a moment, the street grows unexpectedly peaceful. Just distant hoofbeats, soft wind, faint piano music leaking from somewhere above. Then two men start arguing loudly about baseball, and the illusion vanishes immediately. The city remains itself. Messy, political, noisy, restless. Yet beneath all the corruption stories and crime rumours, most people are simply trying to survive another winter night beneath the gaslights. The saloon doors glow like little furnaces against the winter night. You feel the warmth before you even step inside. Beer, coal heat, cigar smoke, wet coats drying beside stoves, onions frying somewhere near the kitchen. The air wraps around you thickly after the cold streets outside where snow still drifts through gaslight. And immediately the noise swallows you. Laughter crashes across the room. Glasses slam onto counters. Someone argues politics near the back wall with such dramatic hand gestures that nearby drinkers lean away protectively. This is one of the social hearts of New York in 1890. Not churches, not government buildings, saloons. There are thousands of them scattered across the city by the end of the 19th century. Some tiny and rough, some polished enough for businessmen in tailored coats. Most crowded, nearly all loud, and almost all important. You squeeze between tables while waiters carry foaming mugs through impossible gaps without spilling much. Men remove hats near the bar while snow melts slowly from their boots onto sawdust scattered across the floor. The sawdust serves practical purposes. It absorbs mud, spilled beer, tobacco ash, and whatever else civilization accidentally drops during long evenings, which appears to be quite a lot. A bartender polishes glasses beneath hanging lamps while simultaneously arguing baseball scores with 3 customers and collecting coins without once losing track of the conversation. Truly elite multitasking. For many working men, saloons provide warmth, companionship, news, and affordable food along with alcohol. Free lunches often accompany drinks. Bread, pickles, boiled eggs, stew, or cheese appear beside beer for customers stretching limited wages through difficult weeks. One old saying claims some labourers practically survived winters on saloon lunches and optimism. The optimism remains historically uncertain. You settle briefly near the stove where steam rises from damp coats hung overhead. Nearby, an exhausted dock worker sleeps with his chin resting against crossed arms while friends continue talking around him. Nobody bothers waking him. The piano player near the front window launches suddenly into a lively tune, and half the room begins singing before the first chorus finishes. Some know the words. Others possess confidence instead. A few surviving accounts from the period describe saloons as unofficial employment exchanges. Men looking for work often check certain bars connected to docks, factories, construction crews, or political organizations. If jobs existed, news spread quickly through drinking networks. Beer and labor opportunities arrive together. A fascinating little custom from immigrant taverns involves neighborhood clubs meeting regularly in back rooms, singing societies, mutual aid groups, political organizations, funeral associations. Entire community structures operate behind ordinary saloon doors. One back room tonight hosts German immigrants singing harmonies around long tables crowded with mugs and sausage plates. Another contains men debating labour strikes beneath clouds of pipe smoke thick enough to hide architectural details. You drift toward the bar where a woman in a dark dress serves whiskey efficiently while ignoring flirtation attempts with professional precision. Although many saloons cater mostly to men, women still work in taverns as entertainers, owners, servers, or musicians despite heavy social judgment from reformers. Respectability becomes complicated in cities this large. Outside certain establishments, temperance activists distribute pamphlets warning about alcohol destroying families, wages, morality, and public order. Inside the saloons, customers generally respond by ordering another round. The cultural battle over alcohol grows increasingly intense during these years. Some reformers sincerely fear drunkenness spreading poverty and violence through working-class neighborhoods. Others target immigrant drinking culture specifically, especially German beer halls and Irish taverns woven deeply into neighborhood life. The city argues about morality almost as loudly as it argues about politics. You notice how many conversations revolve around survival rather than philosophy. Rent prices, factory rumors, sick relatives, wages delayed again, winter coal costs. The saloon provides temporary relief from all of it. Warmth matters enormously. Light matters too. After long hours inside dim workshops or freezing streets, bright crowded rooms feel almost medicinal. One bartender keeps a cat behind the counter specifically to control rats in the cellar. The cat sleeps through absolute chaos with the confidence of an ancient emperor. Frankly inspirational behavior. At another table, several young women drink beer after factory shifts while laughing over workplace gossip. Their cheeks glow red from cold weather and heat mixed together. One imitates a supervisor so perfectly the entire group nearly collapses into hysterics. Even in exhausting cities, people still crave laughter. Writers later disagreed sharply about saloon culture in New York. Some portrayed taverns as dangerous centers of vice and corruption. Others described them as vital social institutions, helping immigrants build community and endure brutal work schedules. Both portraits contain pieces of truth. You step briefly into a dance hall connected to the tavern, where couples spin beneath hanging lamps while musicians scrape fiddles near the stage. Boots pound against wooden floors in rapid rhythm. Skirts flare outward during turns. The room smells of sweat, beer, tobacco, and perfume bought cheaply but worn proudly. A young man rehearses introductions nervously before approaching a woman near the wall. His confidence disappears halfway across the room, a timeless urban tradition. Near midnight, conversations soften slightly as exhaustion settles over the crowd. Men lean closer together around tables. Bartenders wipe counters more slowly. Someone begins quietly singing an old folk song near the back. For a moment, the room feels almost gentle. Outside the windows, snow continues falling over Manhattan while elevated trains rattle through darkness above the streets. Horses stamp beside curbs. Policemen continue patrols beneath gas lamps. But inside the saloon, the city pauses briefly to drink, sing, argue, flirt, complain, and forget itself for a few hours before morning labour begins again. Perhaps that explains why these places survive every reform campaign thrown against them. People do not gather here only for alcohol. They gather because loneliness grows heavy in crowded cities, and warmth shared across a noisy table can feel very close to hope. Even after exhausting workdays and crowded saloons, New York still refuses to go to bed quietly. The city wants entertainment. Always. You step back into the cold night where theatre lights glow across Broadway like rows of captured stars. Posters flap against brick walls advertising comic operas, boxing exhibitions, melodramas, trained animal acts, and singers with dramatic stage names printed in enormous letters. Every block promises spectacle, and New Yorkers adore spectacle. Horse-drawn carriages line the curbs outside theatres, while crowds spill onto sidewalks wrapped in heavy coats and scarves. Wealthy couples arrive beside clerks spending carefully saved wages on balcony seats. Factory girls cluster together laughing beneath feathered hats borrowed from roommates or sisters. For a few hours, everybody wants escape. The theatre district smells wonderfully alive. Roasted peanuts, wet wool, cheap perfume, cigar smoke drifting through the freezing air. You follow the crowd into a vaudeville hall where the warmth strikes immediately along with applause, loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Vaudeville becomes one of the great entertainment crazes of the late 19th century. Variety shows combine singers, dancers, comedians, acrobats, jugglers, magicians, trained dogs, dramatic recitations, and musical performances all on the same stage. Attention spans remain healthy and chaotic. Tonight's audience seems especially enthusiastic about a comedian making jokes about streetcars, landlords, and marriage. Every punchline involving rent prices receives immediate sympathy. A woman beside you laughs so hard she nearly loses her hat pin. Dangerous times. The stage curtains shimmer red beneath gaslights while musicians tune instruments noisily between acts. Audience members shout opinions freely whenever performances disappoint them. Victorian theatre crowds are far less quiet than modern ones. People talk during shows, eat during shows, argue during shows, occasionally throw things during shows. One odd little trend from the era involves soubrette performers, lively comedic actresses famous for flirtation, singing, and playful stage personalities. Audiences follow certain performers with devotion bordering on organised emotional instability. Celebrity culture arrives early and dramatically, outside again. Snow crunches softly beneath boots while newspaper boys continue shouting headlines near theatre exits. You pass a dime museum glowing brightly behind painted signs promising wonders from around the world. 5 cents buys admission. Inside, the room overflows with curiosities. Wax figures, exotic artifacts, skeleton displays, mechanical inventions, painted banners advertising giant snakes, bearded ladies, or mysterious scientific marvels probably assembled from optimism and glue. Dime museums thrive, partly because urban audiences crave novelty constantly. Crowded city life produces endless appetite for distraction, amazement, and stories dramatic enough to briefly overpower ordinary worries. A man near the entrance claims confidently that one exhibit contains an authentic mermaid skeleton. You examine it carefully. The mermaid appears suspiciously composed of fish parts and ambition. A child nearby remains fully convinced, though, so perhaps magic still survives after all. You continue toward a dance hall where music spills directly into the street through swing-in doors. Couples whirl beneath hanging lamps while brass instruments blare loud enough to wake several future generations. Working-class entertainment often depends less on watching and more on participating. Dancing, singing, drinking, cheering. City residents spend long days following rules and routines. Nightlife offers temporary permission to become louder versions of themselves. One recurring complaint from reform groups involves how late ordinary people stay awake in entertainment districts. Critics warn that dance halls and theatres encourage moral decline, wasted wages, and romantic impropriety. Meanwhile, exhausted workers simply seem grateful for some place warm with music. Perspective matters. You stop beside a street magician performing card tricks beneath a lamppost for a crowd of children and labourers. His hands move quickly despite the cold. Coins appear from nowhere. Cards vanish into sleeves. The audience gasps with genuine delight. New York entertainment does not always require grand theatres. Sometimes it only requires skill and enough confidence to gather a crowd before police chase you elsewhere. A number of surviving memoirs mention rooftop entertainment during hot summers. Families escaped suffocating apartments by climbing onto rooftops at night where neighbours shared songs, stories, gossip, and cooler air beneath the stars. The city becomes softer above the streets. You pass a sporting club advertising boxing matches behind curtained windows. Prize fighting grows increasingly popular during these decades despite periodic legal crackdowns. Men gather eagerly to watch fighters test endurance beneath smoky lamps, while bookmakers circulate through the crowd collecting bets. Urban entertainment and gambling remain deeply intertwined. Honestly, humans have always enjoyed turning recreation into financial anxiety. Farther uptown, wealthy New Yorkers attend operas inside glittering halls, where velvet seats and chandeliers signal cultural prestige. Opera attendance becomes partly social performance. Seeing and being seen matter almost as much as the music itself. Downstairs, orchestra music swells magnificently. Upstairs, society gossip travels even faster. One fascinating detail from elite theatre culture involves audience members using opera glasses not only to watch performers but also to inspect other audience members' clothing and behaviour. Expensive binocular gossip. You wander through Central Park briefly where quieter sounds finally emerge. Snow falls softly across frozen pathways while distant carriage bells echo between dark trees. Even here, entertainment continues. Couples stroll, Children slide across icy patches. Musicians play near shelters during warmer seasons. The park offers controlled recreation for a city starving constantly for space and relief. Back downtown, electric lights begin appearing more frequently around major theatres and commercial streets. Their bright white glow feels startling beside softer gaslight nearby. The future is arriving again, one bulb at a time. As midnight approaches, audiences spill from theatres into snowy streets discussing favourite acts while vendors sell roasted nuts and hot coffee beneath the lamps. Faces glow red from laughter and cold air mixed together. For a little while, people forget crowded tenements, factory noise, aching backs, unpaid bills, and political corruption. Not permanently, just long enough. And perhaps in a city, this exhausting temporary escape becomes one of the most valuable luxuries of all. Towards Sunday morning, New York sounds different. Not silent, never silent, but slower somehow. Church bells begin first. Low bronze notes drifting across rooftops while fog curls between chimneys and laundry lines. The sound rolls through immigrant neighborhoods, commercial avenues, crowded tenements, and elegant uptown streets alike, touching nearly every corner of the city before dissolving into cold winter air. You walk through streets still damp from melting snow while families emerge dressed in their best clothing, boots polished carefully, coats brushed clean, children warned repeatedly not to ruin collars before services begin. Religion shapes daily life in ways both obvious and quiet here. Churches stand everywhere. Catholic cathedrals, tiny storefront missions, Jewish synagogues glowing with candles, Protestant chapels tucked between shops and boarding houses. Faith travels across the ocean with immigrants and settles beside them in New York, brick and soot. You step inside a crowded Catholic church downtown where incense hangs thick beneath stained glass windows. Women kneel whispering prayers while candles flicker beside statues worn smooth from years of touching hands. The room smells of wax, damp wool, and faint traces of snow carried indoors on coats. Children squirm beside exhausted parents trying unsuccessfully to maintain solemn dignity, a universal human tradition. Nearby, a Jewish congregation gathers in another neighborhood beneath hanging lamps and Hebrew lettering dark against polished wood. Men remove hats respectfully while prayers rise in warm, layered voices. Outside the synagogue afterward, conversations continue on the sidewalk long after services end. News from Europe, family illnesses, business troubles, marriage plans, faith and ordinary life blend together naturally. Religious spaces provide far more than spiritual comfort in the city. They organize charity, schooling, language instruction, burial societies, and emergency aid for struggling families. In neighborhoods where poverty remains constant, churches and synagogues often become survival networks. You continue walking through chilly streets where mission workers distribute bread and coffee near crowded lodging houses. One woman in a plain dark coat hands blankets carefully to several shivering men sleeping near a basement entrance. Some reformers dedicate enormous energy trying to improve urban conditions through settlement houses, literacy programs, temperance campaigns, and charitable outreach. Their motives vary widely. Genuine compassion exists beside paternalism, religious conviction, social anxiety, and ambition. Human goodness rarely arrives perfectly pure. Inside a settlement house library, children crowd around books while volunteer teachers help immigrants practice English conversation. The room glows warmly against the grey weather outside. A piano sits near one wall. Someone plays softly while tea steams from large kettles in the kitchen. For a few hours, the city feels almost gentle. One unusual little practice survives in certain mission churches where free meals come attached to mandatory sermons. Hungry labourers jokingly refer to these events as soup and salvation. Practical evangelism. You notice that many reform workers are women from relatively comfortable backgrounds moving into poorer districts intentionally. Some genuinely admire immigrant resilience and community life. Others arrive convinced they can fix urban neighbourhoods through moral guidance and organised efficiency. The neighbourhoods themselves often react with mixed feelings, gratitude sometimes, suspicion quite often, You step inside a temperance meeting where speakers warn passionately against alcohol destroying families and wages. Posters show grim illustrations of drunken husbands collapsing into ruin while sorrowful wives clutch frightened children nearby. The emotional subtlety remains limited, yet alcohol abuse truly does devastate many households, especially where exhausting labour and unstable incomes create constant stress. Entire political movements grow from the belief that saloons worsen poverty, violence, illness, and corruption. Meanwhile, only a few streets away, taverns continue filling with customers anyway. The city contains competing moral worlds operating simultaneously. One preacher near the Bowery delivers fiery sermons directly outdoors beside saloons and gambling halls. His breath fogs the air while crowds gather, half from curiosity and half from boredom. Some listeners nod thoughtfully, others laugh openly. One man applauds simply because the preacher insults politicians particularly well. A recurring sight in poor neighbourhoods involves charitable visitors carrying baskets of coal, bread, or old clothing upstairs into freezing apartments during harsh winters. Newspapers sometimes praise these acts warmly, while ignoring the deeper conditions producing such need in the first place. Charity eases suffering. It does not erase overcrowding or low wages. Still, when your apartment is freezing, coal matters more than political theory. You pass a small black church where music spills through open doors rich enough to stop pedestrians briefly on the sidewalk outside. Voices rise together with extraordinary warmth beneath simple wooden rafters. Inside, the congregation claps softly in rhythm while children lean sleepily against mothers' shoulders. The entire room seems to breathe together. Even people who rarely attend formal services often carry strong spiritual customs into daily life. Lucky charms tucked into pockets, candles lit beside windows, prayers whispered before difficult journeys or dangerous workdays. The city encourages ritual because uncertainty surrounds everything. Illness, employment, rent, weather, accidents, tomorrow itself. As evening approaches, church bells begin sounding again through misty streets while gas lamps flicker awake one by one across Manhattan. Families head home carrying leftovers from church suppers or charity kitchens wrapped carefully against the cold. You realise something slowly while watching them disappear into glowing apartment windows. For many New Yorkers, faith offers structure more than certainty, a rhythm, a gathering place. A reason to keep believing that crowded streets and hard labour do not entirely define human existence. And perhaps in a city this relentless, hope itself becomes a form of shelter. By evening, the city begins folding itself inward. Shop shutters close. Street vendors wheel carts home through slush and horse mud. Factory whistles fade into the distance while windows brighten one floor at a time across Manhattan. And now people return home, or at least to the places they call home. You climb another narrow tenement staircase where supper smells drift through every crack in the walls. Onion soup, fried potatoes, boiled cabbage, salt pork sizzling in iron pans somewhere nearby. Bread bakes slowly enough to make the entire hallway feel warmer. The building itself creaks constantly. Footsteps overhead, babies crying, someone coughing behind a thin partition wall. A sewing machine still rattling stubbornly 2 floors below. Evening inside a New York tenement means everybody trying to reclaim tiny pieces of comfort after long, exhausting days. You enter one apartment where a family gathers around a scarred wooden table beneath weak lamplight. Coats hang drying near the stove while wet boots line the wall beside stacked coal buckets. The room feels crowded immediately. Not chaotic exactly, just full. Children sit shoulder to shoulder sharing bowls of stew while their father rubs warmth back into stiff fingers blackened from factory grease. Their mother cuts bread carefully into equal pieces with the precision of someone managing a very serious economic operation. Because she is, every loaf matters here. The gaslight flickers softly against peeling wallpaper while steam fogs the windows. Outside, snow falls through darkness beyond the glass. Inside, people finally exhale. One thing you notice quickly is how multi-purpose every room becomes after sunset. Kitchens turn into bedrooms. Tables become ironing stations. Beds disappear beneath folded blankets so people can still move around before sleeping. Privacy remains rare. Curtains sometimes divide sleeping spaces, sometimes not even that. Boarders often rent corners of rooms or spare mattresses because rent prices continue climbing as the city grows more crowded. You hear one tenant apologising quietly for arriving home late because another worker already sleeps near the stove, wrapped in coats against the cold. Urban life requires constant negotiation of space. A curious little domestic habit from this period involves families placing bricks near stoves before bed, so the bricks hold warmth overnight beneath blankets or beside frozen feet. Victorian heating technology occasionally resembles advanced camping. Children finish supper and immediately begin homework. Chores, or mending clothes. One girl darns socks beside the lamp while her younger brother practices spelling words aloud with growing frustration. Another child sleeps already across 2 chairs pushed together near the wall. Nobody wakes him. You notice how evenings often centre around simple routines repeated endlessly across the city. Boots drying, laundry folding, soup simmering, tea pouring, men reading newspapers aloud while neighbours listen. The newspaper reading especially fascinates you. Literacy spreads steadily during these years, but not everyone reads English comfortably yet. In many homes, one person reads articles aloud while others react collectively to stories about politics, strikes, crimes, baseball scores, or disasters. Tonight's paper includes arguments about labour unrest and rising food prices. Nobody in the room seems surprised. Outside the apartment, hallway life continues too. Doors remain partly open because overheated rooms need airflow. Women borrow onions from neighbours. Children wander between apartments carrying messages or leftover food. Community and intrusion become almost impossible to separate. One older woman down the hall sings quietly while braiding a child's hair near the stove. The melody drifts softly through the building, mixed with kettle whistles and distant wagon noise from the street below. A lot of surviving letters from working-class New Yorkers mention exhaustion at night more than happiness or misery specifically. People describe sore feet, aching backs, swollen hands, and overwhelming fatigue with astonishing regularity. The city wears people down physically, yet home still matters enormously. Even tiny homes. You visit a boarding house farther uptown where unmarried workers rent narrow rooms furnished with little more than iron beds, wash basins, and hooks for clothing. Hallways smell faintly of soap, tobacco smoke, boiled coffee, and damp winter coats. Some boarders barely speak to each other. Others form temporary substitute families around shared meals and evening conversations. One young clerk sits carefully writing a letter home beside a lamp no brighter than a candle. Ink stains his fingers while elevated trains rumble faintly outside the window. Homesickness fills many rooms in New York. You can almost feel it physically sometimes. An odd little evening custom in some immigrant families involves heating beer, wine, or cider with spices during winter months to stretch warmth through crowded apartments where fuel remains expensive. The drinks smell wonderful. Cinnamon, cloves, steam rising into dim light. A grandmother near the stove tells stories from the old country while children listen half awake beneath quilts. Outside, the city keeps moving, but inside these rooms, memory becomes another kind of shelter. You notice too how women's labour continues long after supper ends. Dishes cleaned, clothes mended, children washed, lunches prepared for tomorrow. The workday simply changes shape. Men often collapse into chairs reading newspapers or smoking pipes while women continue moving through the apartment adjusting blankets, scrubbing pans, folding clothing. Not always, but often enough. One recurring tension inside crowded homes involves noise itself. Babies cry, boarders snore, couples argue through thin walls. Neighbours practice instruments badly at unfortunate hours. Sleep becomes communal whether people enjoy that fact or not. Still, moments of tenderness appear quietly everywhere. A father repairing a toy, a mother warming cold hands between her own, brothers sharing blankets against drafts creeping through window frames. The city outside remains loud, political, dirty, ambitious, and exhausting. But inside these cramped, glowing rooms, Ordinary people build small islands of warmth against it. And perhaps that is the real secret of surviving New York in 1890. Not wealth, not power, just enough light, food, company, and heat to face another morning when the trains begin rattling again. Sometime after midnight, New York changes character again. The crowds thin, the noise stretches farther between buildings, and suddenly you can hear individual sounds drifting through the darkness instead of one endless roar. A horse snorting beside a delivery wagon, distant laughter spilling from a saloon doorway, footsteps crossing wet cobblestones, the slow scrape of a broom outside a bakery preparing for morning work already. You walk through gaslit streets where shadows lean longer across the pavement beneath elevated train tracks. Snowmelt glistens in the gutters. Windows darken gradually, floor by floor, while chimney smoke drifts above the rooftops into pale winter fog. The city never fully sleeps, but it does grow quieter in layers. A watchman passes carrying a lantern and heavy coat buttoned tight against the cold. His boots strike the pavement slowly, deliberately, as though he alone remains responsible for guarding civilization till sunrise. Night work fills the city more than daytime residents probably realize. Bakers begin before dawn. Market workers unload produce while most families sleep. Printers prepare morning newspapers through the early hours. Stable hands feed and brush horses beneath steaming lamps. You step near the docks again, where the harbour breathes cold salt air into Manhattan streets. Tugboats cough smoke into the darkness while ferry lights drift across black water like floating candles. The harbour at night feels almost peaceful compared to daytime chaos. Almost until a crate crashes somewhere nearby, followed by several highly creative curses. There it is, New York restored. Along the waterfront, labour continues under swinging lanterns. Men in thick coats haul ropes stiff with ice while ships creak softly against the piers. Coffee vendors stay awake serving dock workers hot drinks from battered metal urns. The coffee smells burnt enough to revive the dead. Useful quality at this hour. One little-known feature of 19th century city nights involves night soil collection. Before modern sanitation systems fully develop, workers remove human waste from privies and cesspools during overnight hours when fewer pedestrians crowd the streets. Urban history occasionally becomes very humbling. You decide not to investigate the wagons too closely. Farther inland, newspaper offices blaze with light. Inside, printers work beside towering presses rattling loud enough to shake the floors. Ink stains, hands, sleeves, faces, and probably souls at this point. Stacks of fresh papers pile rapidly while editors argue headlines under gaslight. Morning news begins long before morning itself. Outside, newsboys already wait wrapped in scarves against the cold. Some doze sitting upright against walls while others gamble with pennies beside steam rising from sewer grates. Children again. Always children somewhere in the city. You wander through streets where electric lights appear more often now, especially near commercial districts. Their pale glow looks strangely modern against the softer yellow gas lamps nearby. People stop sometimes just to stare at them. Electricity still carries a sense of wonder mixed with distrust. One woman passing beside you mutters that electric wires probably attract lightning directly into buildings. Honestly, given the state of early infrastructure, caution seems reasonable. The elevated railway rattles overhead, carrying late passengers home through the darkness. Inside the cars, exhausted workers lean against fogged windows while conductors move carefully through narrow aisles collecting fares. A few passengers sleep openly despite the noise. A remarkable achievement. The streets below belong increasingly to workers cleaning up after everyone else. Street sweepers scrape mud, manure, ash, and trash into heavy piles steaming faintly in the cold air. Their work remains endless because horses and humans both produce astonishing amounts of mess. Some city officials calculate that tons of manure accumulate daily across Manhattan streets during busy seasons. You suddenly feel much more grateful for modern sanitation departments. Near a bakery window, you watch dough rising beside warm ovens while bakers move through flour clouds ghostly white beneath the lamps. The smell drifting into the street feels comforting enough to stop pedestrians in their tracks. Fresh bread at 2 in the morning somehow seems deeply philosophical. You pass a lodging house where men sleep stacked close together beneath rough blankets, inside overheated rooms smelling of wet boots and pipe smoke. Cheap lodging offers little privacy, but at least keeps winter wind outside. A few restless voices still murmur in the darkness. Snoring answers them from nearby beds. One strange little superstition lingering in some neighborhoods involves avoiding mirrors during late-night hours because wandering spirits supposedly travel more easily after midnight. Victorian cities remain surprisingly haunted in people's imaginations. You continue walking beneath flickering lamps while snow begins falling again in tiny soft flakes. The city sounds muted now. Quieter wagons, quieter footsteps. Even the saloons have softened into lower conversations and tired piano music drifting faintly through walls. A policeman pauses beside a lamppost to warm his hands around a paper cup of coffee purchased from an all-night vendor. Nearby, a stray dog circles twice before settling beneath a stairwell for sleep. Everyone searches for warmth eventually. The skyline itself looks different at night. Church spires disappear into fog while factory chimneys rise black against the pale sky. Apartment windows glow here and there like scattered embers across the island. Thousands of lives stacked together vertically, dreaming, coughing, arguing, loving, sleeping uneasily. A few scholars later suggested that modern urban insomnia truly begins in places like New York during this era. Artificial light, industrial schedules, newspapers, trains, nightlife. And shift work gradually weaken the old rhythm of sunrise and sunset. The city teaches people to stay awake longer, to move faster, to keep going. And yet now, walking through these cold, nearly empty streets, you sense exhaustion finally settling over Manhattan like falling snow. The city breathes slower, not peacefully exactly, but slower, and somewhere beyond the rooftops, dawn already waits patiently beneath the dark horizon. By the final years of the 19th century, New York already feels impatient with itself. The city has grown too fast for its own streets, too fast for its pipes, housing, ferries, horses, and politicians. You can sense it everywhere now. In the steel skeletons rising above older brick buildings, in the electric lights spreading block by block, in the endless conversations about bridges, transit lines, unions, immigration, machines, and fortunes waiting somewhere just beyond the next decade. New York in 1890 does not feel finished. It feels hungry for the future. You stand near the Brooklyn Bridge at dawn while fog drifts across the East River below. Wagons rattle over the great stone span beside pedestrians wrapped tightly against the cold. The bridge itself still amazes people years after completion. And honestly, fair enough. It looks impossible. Steel cables vanish upward into mist while the city stretches outward beyond them in every direction. Clerks hurry towards Manhattan offices. Labourers carry lunch pails. Women balancing market baskets pause briefly to stare over the water before continuing on. Everybody's moving towards something. The bridge changes daily life profoundly by connecting Brooklyn and Manhattan more efficiently than ferries alone ever could. Entire neighborhoods expand because commuting becomes easier. More people flood into the city every year searching for work, opportunity, escape, or reinvention. You overhear two men arguing whether skyscrapers will someday fill the entire skyline. One insists buildings cannot possibly rise much higher without collapsing into the streets. The other claims engineers will solve everything eventually. Meanwhile, behind them, another steel-framed structure climbs floor by floor into the smoky air. The future rarely asks permission first. A newspaper boy rushes past waving headlines about labour strikes and industrial growth. Workers throughout the city increasingly organise for better wages, safer conditions, and shorter hours. Meetings fill union halls late into the night. Factory owners complain constantly. Workers complain louder. You enter a crowded coffee house where several immigrant labourers discuss rumours of new transit tunnels planned beneath the streets. The idea sounds absurd to some listeners. Trains underground, beneath Manhattan, mud and bedrock. Surely not. And yet engineers already dream about exactly that. New York has begun imagining itself vertically and underground at the same time. One curious little fashion among wealthy businessmen involves collecting miniature models of famous buildings and bridges for office desks or libraries. Tiny steel towers and bridge replicas become symbols of progress, ambition, and technological confidence. Industrial optimism apparently fits nicely on shelves. Outside, electric streetlights burn pale against the morning fog, while horse-drawn wagons continue clogging intersections below them. Old systems and new systems overlap everywhere. Telegraph wires hum overhead. Newsboys still shout papers manually. Elevated trains thunder past gas lamps. The city exists in transition constantly. You walk north where apartment buildings expand farther uptown each year. Entire districts that once seemed distant countryside now fill with brick rows, trolley lines and storefronts. Land itself becomes speculation. Everybody talks about property values. Always property values. Immigrants continue pouring through the harbour in astonishing numbers. Some arrive with skilled trades, others possess only relatives' addresses and stubborn determination. Entire steamship companies advertise passage to America, with glowing promises of work and prosperity waiting immediately upon arrival. Reality proves more complicated. Still, people come. A seamstress you met earlier dreams of opening her own shop someday. A dock worker hopes his children will enter professions requiring cleaner hands. A newsboy boasts he will become a politician before 30. New York feeds ambition almost as effectively as it feeds exhaustion. One recurring fear drifting through newspapers and political speeches involves overcrowding itself. Too many immigrants, too many buildings, too much traffic, too much poverty packed onto one island. And yet the city keeps absorbing more people anyway. A man selling maps beside City Hall points proudly toward neighbourhoods that barely existed a generation earlier. He talks about expanding transit, larger department stores, electric grids, and buildings climbing ever higher. His voice carries almost religious confidence. The future will be bigger, faster, brighter. Modern scholars sometimes wonder whether people living through this period truly understood how radically urban life was about to change. Reading diaries from the 1890s reveals both excitement and unease. Some residents see limitless possibility ahead. Others fear the city growing too crowded, mechanized and impersonal. Probably both instincts prove correct. You stop beside a photographer's studio displaying portraits in the window. Families pose stiffly in dark clothing hoping to preserve something permanent, while the city transforms around them at astonishing speed. Memory becomes valuable when everything changes constantly. Children born in 1890 may live long enough to see automobiles replace horses, airplanes crossing oceans, radio entering homes, and skyscrapers remaking the skyline entirely. Right now, though, the streets still belong mostly to hoofbeats. You hear them echoing across wet pavement beneath elevated tracks while smoke drifts upward from factory chimneys into pale winter sky. A few inventors demonstrate strange new machines in shop windows, early electric appliances, mechanical gadgets, devices promising efficiency and convenience. Most people stare skeptically. New Yorkers have already survived enough miracle cures and financial schemes to approach innovation carefully. Still, curiosity wins eventually. It usually does. As evening approaches once more, lights bloom gradually across the city. Electric bulbs now shine beside gas lamps in growing numbers. Ferry whistles echo across dark water. Elevated trains spark against the night. You realize the city you have wandered through all this time is balancing between centuries. Part old immigrant port, part industrial machine, part modern metropolis not fully born yet. And every exhausted worker, street vendor, housewife, clerk, dock labourer, child, politician, actor, and immigrant becomes part of that transformation whether they intend to or not. The future New York already exists here in fragments. Inside glowing windows, inside steel beams, inside impossible ambitions whispered over coffee before dawn. Waiting patiently beneath the smoke, at last, the city begins settling into darkness one final time. Not complete darkness. New York in 1890 never truly becomes dark anymore. Too many lamps burn through the night. Too many ferries cross the rivers. Too many bakers, printers, watchmen, nurses, stable hands, policemen, and market workers remain awake preparing tomorrow before today has fully ended. Still, something softens. You stand near the harbour again where this long wandering journey first began. Cold wind moves gently across the black water, while ferry lights drift slowly through the mist like floating embers. Behind you, Manhattan glows, thousands upon thousands of windows scattered upward through the night, some bright, some dim, some already dark where exhausted families finally sleep beneath patched quilts and fading stove heat. The city breathes differently now, slower, tired, yet never entirely still. You hear distant hoofbeats crossing cobblestones somewhere inland. An elevated train rattles faintly through the darkness before fading again. Farther down the docks, sailors laugh beside coiled ropes shining wet beneath lantern light. The smells remain familiar now. Coal smoke, salt water, wet wood, bread baking somewhere before dawn. You realise you have learned the city through its senses more than anything else. Not through monuments, not through famous names, but through sounds drifting upward from stairwells, through crowded kitchens glowing behind curtains, through steam rising from market carts and snow settling quietly onto rooftops. Daily life here is rarely glamorous. Most people wake tired, work too long, worry constantly about rent, illness, weather, or wages, yet somehow the city still fills with music every evening, with stories, with children laughing in alleys, with women singing softly while mending clothes beneath gaslight. That may be the strangest thing about New York in 1890. Not the skyscrapers are beginning to rise, not the wealth, not even the overcrowding. It is the stubborn persistence of ordinary humanity inside conditions that often seem designed to crush comfort completely. You walk slowly along the waterfront while ice knocks softly against wooden pilings below. A newspaper page skitters across the pavement before catching beneath a wagon wheel. Tomorrow morning the streets will fill again. Coffee vendors shouting beside dawn ferries, factory whistles, streetcars grinding along icy rails, mothers waking children before sunrise, newsboys racing through the cold. The city will repeat itself while changing at the same time. A curious thing happens when you spend enough time imagining old cities closely like this. The past stops feeling distant. You begin realizing these people were not decorative historical figures wandering around in sepia photographs waiting politely for textbooks to explain them later. They were exhausted, cold, hopeful, annoyed about prices, proud of children, embarrassed by neighbours, excited for weekends, afraid of sickness. Exactly like people now, just with more horses, far more horses. A ship horn moans softly across the harbour. Above the rooftops, smoke drifts slowly into pale clouds where snow threatens again by morning. The Brooklyn Bridge stands enormous in the distance, its cables fading into darkness while tiny lanterns move steadily across it like fireflies. Somewhere beyond those lights, millions of future lives already wait hidden inside the next century. Subways, automobiles, jazz clubs, skyscrapers taller than anyone here can comfortably imagine. Yet tonight New York still belongs to gaslight and steam, to iron rails and horse breath, to crowded kitchens and cold tenement staircases. You pass a final row of apartment windows glowing warmly against the winter dark. Inside one room, a mother rocks a child slowly beside the stove. In another, a clerk falls asleep over a newspaper. Somewhere above them, someone practices violin quietly enough not to wake neighbours. The notes drift outward into the night air. Thin, gentle, almost sleepy. And gradually the city itself begins sounding sleepy too. Not silent, never silent, but calmer now. The harbour water moves softly against the docks. Snowflakes drift past the lamps in slow spirals. A bakery door opens briefly, releasing warmth and the smell of fresh bread into the freezing air before closing again. You pause there for one final moment, breathing in coal smoke and winter wind, listening to the distant heartbeat of 1890. York settling toward another restless night, and somewhere in all those glowing windows, ordinary people finally close their eyes beneath quilts, shawls, and warm blankets while tomorrow waits patiently beyond the dark horizon. So now, as the lamps dim softly across the harbour and the last carriage wheels fade into the snowy streets, you can let the city drift away too. Let the noise soften. Let the smoke dissolve into the winter sky. Let the ferry bells grow distant across the water. And imagine Manhattan slowly disappearing beneath falling snow. Warm windows fading one by one into silence while the old city finally rests. Sleep comes easier now. The streets are quieter. The trains farther away. The harbour calm beneath the night mist. And New York, for just a little while, has finally grown still. Sweet dreams.